I stood alone in my cap and gown, scanning the empty auditorium seats where my parents should have been. The stadium roared 3 miles away, where they were hosting their annual Super Bowl party, instead of watching me graduate summa cum laude from nursing school. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother asking me to pick up more beer on my way home. I walked across that stage with tears streaming down my face, knowing everything was about to change forever. The drive home felt endless as I gripped my nursing degree with trembling hands. 4 years of sleepless nights, clinical rotations, and exhausting study sessions had led to this moment, and my parents had chosen a football game over witnessing their only daughter achieve her dream. The irony cut deep because they had always claimed my education was their top priority. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home in suburban Columbus to find cars lining both sides of the street. The bass from the sound system vibrated through my chest as I approached the front door. Red and blue streamers hung from every surface, and a massive banner reading "Super Bowl Champions" stretched across the living room. Not a single graduation decoration existed anywhere. My mother Janet barely glanced up from refilling chip bowls when I entered. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore the expensive team jersey she had bought specifically for today. "Oh, good, you're back. Did you remember the beer? We're running low already." She gestured toward the crowded kitchen where neighbors I had known my entire life cheered at the television. "Mom, I just graduated," I said quietly, still holding my diploma. "That's nice, sweetie. The beer." My father Bob emerged from the garage carrying cases of beverages, his face flushed with excitement and alcohol. At 52, he still acted like the college football star he had been decades ago, reliving his glory days through professional sports. "Cindy, perfect timing. Help me get these drinks distributed before halftime." "Dad, I graduated today, remember?" He paused for exactly 3 seconds, his expression blank. Right, college stuff. Congratulations." Then he turned to our neighbor, Mr. Johnson. "Did you see that touchdown pass? Absolutely incredible arm strength." I stood there invisible in my cap and gown while 30 people celebrated in the house where I grew up. Mrs. Henderson from next door approached with a forced smile. "Congratulations on finishing school, dear. Your parents mentioned you graduated sometime this week." Sometime this week. They had deliberately kept the exact date vague to avoid any guilt about their choice. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was not an oversight or poor timing. They had actively chosen the party over my graduation ceremony. I escaped to my childhood bedroom, closing the door against the noise downstairs. The room remained exactly as I had left it at 18, frozen in time with boy band posters and high school trophies. I sat on my twin bed and opened my phone to the photos I had taken after the ceremony. In every single picture, empty seats surrounded me like a monument to neglect. While searching for something to distract myself, I noticed the wastebasket beside my desk. Crumpled papers filled the bottom, and one caught my attention. I smoothed out the creased document to find the graduation announcement I had carefully crafted 3 weeks ago. The formal invitation listed the date, time, and significance of the ceremony. My parents had thrown it away without even reading it completely. The noise downstairs grew louder as someone scored another touchdown. I could hear my father's booming voice explaining game statistics to anyone within earshot. He had memorized every player's college career and draft position, yet he could not remember the date his daughter graduated nursing school. My phone rang, displaying the number for Nancy Peterson, my clinical supervisor at the hospital. "Cindy, I was hoping to congratulate you today. How was the ceremony?" "It was fine," I lied, wiping tears from my cheeks. "Your parents must be so proud. 4.0 GPA and already a job offer at Cleveland General. You're going to make an exceptional nurse." Through my bedroom window, I could see neighbors arriving with more food and drinks. They had planned this celebration for weeks, maybe months. The timing was not coincidental. My graduation had been scheduled and announced since the beginning of the semester, yet my parents had deliberately planned their party for the same afternoon. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Janet peeked her head inside. "Honey, Mrs. Williams brought her famous 7-layer dip. You should come try some before it's gone." "I just graduated college today, Mom. She sighed with exaggerated patience. I know that, Cindy, but you'll have plenty of time to think about college later. Right now we have guests and they expect to see the whole family participating. Participating in what? Celebrating the achievement they had missed. Pretending everything was normal while my heart broke a little more with each passing minute. I heard Bob's voice carrying up the stairwell. Janet, tell her to bring down more chairs from the garage. The Andersons just arrived and we need seating. My mother's face brightened. Perfect, Cindy, you heard your father. I stared at her in disbelief. Not only had they missed my graduation, but now they expected me to serve as unpaid labor for their party. The same party that had taken priority over the most important day of my academic career. Did you take any pictures today? I asked, desperately hoping for some acknowledgement. Janet looked confused. Pictures of what? Oh, the graduation thing. No, honey, we were busy setting up, but I'm sure the school took plenty. She disappeared downstairs, leaving me alone with the crushing realization that my own parents viewed my college graduation as the graduation thing. I opened my laptop and began scrolling through social media. Dozens of my classmates had posted photos with their families, all smiling and proud at various restaurants and celebration gatherings. Parents held flowers, siblings wore proud expressions, and grandparents beamed beside their accomplished grandchildren. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Can you also grab paper towels from the pantry when you come down? Someone spilled salsa on the white carpet. I turned off my phone and sat in the silence of my childhood bedroom. The contrast between the celebration downstairs and the emptiness in my heart created a hollow ache that seemed to expand with every breath. Today was supposed to be the culmination of everything I had worked toward. Instead, it felt like the beginning of understanding just how little my achievements meant to the people who were supposed to love me most. The muffled sounds of laughter and cheering continued below as I held my nursing degree, wondering when exactly I had become invisible in my own family. The following morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I had spent the night listening to the party wind down, followed by the sounds of my parents cleaning up beer bottles and disposing of chip bags until nearly 2 a.m. By 7 a.m., they were moving around the kitchen with the focused energy of people who had something important to discuss. I found them seated at the kitchen table with coffee mugs and a stack of official-looking papers spread between them. Bob wore his serious expression, the one he typically reserved for discussing major purchases or disciplining me as a teenager. Janet had dark circles under her eyes, and her usual cheerful demeanor had been replaced by something approaching anxiety. Good morning, sweetheart, Janet said with forced brightness. We need to have a family conversation. I poured myself coffee and sat across from them, noting how they had positioned themselves like a united front. The papers on the table included what appeared to be bank statements, legal documents, and several envelopes marked with red stamps. Cindy, we're so proud of your graduation, Bob began, his tone carefully measured. Nursing is a stable career with excellent earning potential. This sudden interest in my achievement felt jarring after yesterday's complete dismissal. Thank you, I replied cautiously. Janet reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Your father and I have been discussing your future, and we think it's time for you to start contributing to the family finances. Contributing how? Bob cleared his throat and tapped the stack of papers. We've run into some temporary financial difficulties. Nothing serious, just some unexpected expenses and poor timing with a few investments. The word temporary hung in the air like a lie we all recognized, but nobody acknowledged. I had heard variations of this conversation throughout my teenage years, usually preceding requests for me to skip school activities to save money or to take on part-time jobs to help with household expenses. What kind of difficulties, I asked. Janet and Bob exchanged a look that lasted several seconds too long. Finally, Janet pulled a folded document from the bottom of the stack. We received this notice 3 weeks ago. The bank is threatening foreclosure proceedings if we don't catch up on the mortgage payments. She handed me the official letter and I scanned the dense legal language until I found the critical information. They were 4 months behind on payments, not 3, as Bob had implied. The total amount due immediately was $13,847, plus additional fees and penalties that brought the figure closer to $16,000. 4 months. I looked up from the letter. How does someone fall 4 months behind without mentioning it? Bob's jaw tightened. Things have been tight since I took the early retirement package from the plant. Early retirement package. Another exchanged look between my parents. Janet spoke carefully. Your father decided to leave his position to pursue some entrepreneurial opportunities. I got laid off, Bob said bluntly, earning a sharp glare from his wife. The plant downsized and they offered buyouts to senior employees. I thought I could make more money investing in cryptocurrency and day trading. The kitchen fell silent except for the humming of the refrigerator. Cryptocurrency and day trading. My father, who struggled to program the television remote, had quit his stable job to become an investor in digital currencies he did not understand. When did this happen? I asked. 6 months ago, Janet admitted. We didn't want to worry you during your final semester. 6 months ago, they had been encouraging me to focus on my studies, while they were secretly drowning in debt caused by my father's financial gambling. 6 months of lying by omission while I stressed about clinical rotations and state board examinations. There's more. Bob continued, producing another set of documents. We've been carrying some credit card debt and the interest rates have gotten away from us. He spread out statements from 5 different credit cards, each showing balances that made my stomach churn. The minimum payments alone totaled over $800 per month, and most of the cards were at their maximum limits. How much total, I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Janet did the calculation on a piece of scrap paper, adding figures while biting her lower lip. $37,412, not including the mortgage. $53,000. My parents owed more money than I had ever seen in my entire life. The signing bonus from Cleveland General was $3,000, meant to help me relocate and begin my career. It would not even cover 1 month of their debt payments. I don't understand how this happened so quickly, I said. Bob's face reddened. The investments went south faster than we anticipated. And your mother's been handling the household budget, so some things got overlooked. I've been handling the budget because you refused to look at it, Janet snapped. Every time I tried to discuss our spending, you said you were working on big picture solutions. This was clearly an ongoing argument that had been brewing behind closed doors for months. I watched my parents glare at each other across the kitchen table, realizing that their marriage was fracturing under the weight of their financial irresponsibility. Regardless of whose fault it is, Janet said, attempting to regain control of the conversation, we need immediate help to avoid losing the house. What exactly are you asking me to do? Bob leaned forward. Your signing bonus and first few paychecks could get us caught up on the mortgage. Once we're stable again, we can work out a repayment plan. You want me to give you my signing bonus? Not give, Janet corrected quickly. Loan, this is a temporary situation. I stared at my parents, trying to process the magnitude of their request. They had missed my graduation to host a party, and now they wanted me to hand over the money I had earned through 4 years of exhaustive education and dedication. Money that was supposed to help me start my independent adult life. What about the house? I asked. If you can't afford the payments, maybe it's time to downsize. Bob's expression hardened. This is our family home, Cindy. We've lived here for 22 years. Your mother has put her heart and soul into decorating and maintaining this place. But if you can't afford it, we can afford it, Janet interrupted. We just need a bridge loan to get through this rough patch. A bridge loan. They were using financial terminology to make their requests sound professional and reasonable, when in reality they were asking their daughter to rescue them from the consequences of their own poor choices. What happens if I say no? I asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Bob and Janet looked at each other again, and I could see them silently debating how much pressure to apply. Well, Bob said slowly, I suppose we would have to explore other options. Maybe ask your Uncle Marcus for help, though that would be embarrassing for the family. Or we could contact some of those debt consolidation companies, Janet added, though their interest rates are usually terrible. Neither of these alternatives sounded like real options. They were suggesting scenarios designed to make me feel guilty for even considering refusal. The implication was clear. Good daughters sacrifice their own financial security to save their parents from the consequences of their mistakes. I thought about the empty seats at my graduation ceremony, about my crumpled announcement in the wastebasket about being asked to fetch beer while wearing my cap and gown. Now they wanted me to fund their continued irresponsibility with money I had not yet earned. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. Bob's face showed his displeasure. "Time is something we don't have much of, Cindy. The bank wants an answer by the end of this week." "Then maybe you should have mentioned this financial crisis before yesterday." Janet reached for my hand again. "Sweetheart, I know this is overwhelming, but family helps family. That's what we do. We've supported you through college, and now it's time for you to help us through a difficult period." Supported me through college. The phrase struck me as odd because I had worked 20 hours per week throughout my entire degree program and taken out student loans for tuition and living expenses. Their support had consisted primarily of allowing me to live at home rent-free while I attended classes and worked. "Let me think about it," I repeated, standing up from the table. "Of course," Janet said with a tight smile. "But remember, Cindy, we're all in this together. Family takes care of family." I retreated to my bedroom with the weight of their expectation pressing down on my shoulders. $13,847 to save the house, plus ongoing support to help them manage their crushing debt. They were asking me to postpone my own independence indefinitely to fund their lifestyle. The more I considered their request, the more questions arose. How had they accumulated so much debt so quickly? Why had they hidden their financial problems until they needed my money? And most importantly, what would prevent this same scenario from repeating itself in 6 months or a year? I opened my laptop and began researching financial assistance programs, debt consolidation options, and foreclosure alternatives. If I was going to help my parents, I wanted to understand all the available solutions, not just the one that involved me sacrificing my future. But as I read about bankruptcy procedures and mortgage modification programs, a darker possibility began to form in my mind. What if this was not really about temporary financial difficulties? What if my parents had planned this conversation long before my graduation, knowing that my nursing career would make me a reliable source of income for years to come? The thought made me feel sick, but I could not dismiss it entirely. Yesterday's graduation had been inconvenient for their party planning. Today's financial crisis required my immediate attention and resources. The timing felt less like coincidence and more like strategy. I needed to understand exactly what I was being asked to sacrifice and whether my parents truly intended to solve their financial problems or simply transfer the burden of supporting them to me. Unable to concentrate on job preparation, with so many unanswered questions swirling through my mind, I decided to search for graduation photos in the garage storage boxes. Maybe finding some evidence of my parents' pride in past achievements would help me understand how our family dynamic had shifted so dramatically. The garage had become a repository for 2 decades of accumulated possessions. Cardboard boxes lined the walls labeled with my mother's neat handwriting, Cindy school papers, holiday decorations, Bob's sports memorabilia. I pulled down the box marked with my name, expecting to find elementary school art projects and high school yearbooks. Instead, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Scattered throughout my childhood mementos were unopened envelopes addressed to me. College recruitment letters, scholarship notifications, and financial aid documents that I had never seen before. The postmarks dated back 4 years, beginning during my senior year of high school. With trembling hands, I opened the first envelope. Indiana University was offering me a full academic scholarship covering tuition, room, board, and books. The letter was enthusiastic and detailed, explaining how my test scores and grades had qualified me for their most prestigious merit award. The deadline for accepting had passed 3 years ago. The next envelope contained a similar offer from Ohio State University: full-ride scholarship, priority registration for classes, and guaranteed housing in the honors dormitory, also expired. Purdue University. University of Michigan, Pennsylvania State University. One after another, I opened letters offering me free education at some of the most respected institutions in the country. Scholarships I never knew existed, opportunities my parents had hidden from me while encouraging me to attend the local community college to save money. I sat on the concrete floor of the garage surrounded by evidence of my parents' deception, trying to understand their motivation. Why would they prevent me from accepting full scholarships to prestigious universities? What benefit could they possibly gain from forcing me to take a longer, more expensive path through community college and in-state tuition? At the bottom of the box, I found bank statements that provided a devastating answer. The statements showed regular deposits labeled Education Fund, family contributions. For the past 4 years, relatives had been sending money to help pay for my college expenses. Hundreds of dollars per month from grandparents, aunts, uncles, and family friends who believed they were supporting my education. But the corresponding withdrawals told a different story. The money had been transferred out within days of each deposit used for mortgage payments, credit card bills, and daily living expenses. My family had been donating to my education, while my parents used those funds to maintain their lifestyle. I found canceled checks from my grandmother, each one accompanied by a handwritten note expressing pride in my academic achievements and excitement about my future. She had contributed over $8,000 during my college years, believing she was helping me graduate debt-free. My hands shook as I opened an envelope addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Patterson neighbors. Inside was a thank you note from my mother, gracefully accepting $200 for Cindy's textbook expenses and promising to make sure she knows how much your support means to her future success. They had been fundraising. My parents had systematically collected money from everyone who cared about me, claiming financial hardship, while using the donations to cover their own irresponsible spending. I was not just their daughter, I was their unknowing business model. I heard footsteps approaching the garage and quickly stuffed the papers back into the box. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway carrying a covered dish. "Cindy, I was hoping to catch you. I brought some leftover casserole from yesterday's party." Mrs. Patterson had lived next door for 15 years and had always shown interest in my academic progress. She had attended my high school graduation and frequently asked about my college experiences. "Mrs. Patterson, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, dear." "Have my parents ever asked you for money, for my education, or anything else?" Her expression shifted from friendly to cautious. "Well, yes, actually. Over the years, your mother has mentioned how expensive college has become, your father's job situation and all. We've tried to help when we could." "How much help?" She looked uncomfortable. "Several $100s over the past few years. We wanted to make sure you could focus on your studies without worrying about financial stress." Several $100s from just one neighbor. I was beginning to understand the true scope of my parents' deception. "Mrs. Patterson, did they ever tell you I was having problems, academic problems or personal issues?" "Oh my, yes. Your mother mentioned you were struggling with the pressure of nursing school. She said you'd been having some emotional difficulties and that the family was rallying around you during a tough time." Emotional difficulties, struggling with pressure. My parents had been telling people I was mentally unstable to justify their constant need for financial support. They had damaged my reputation throughout the neighborhood while simultaneously profiting from the concern of people who genuinely cared about me. "What kind of emotional difficulties?" Mrs. Patterson looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I probably shouldn't repeat gossip, dear, but your mother was worried about some of the choices you were making. She mentioned you'd been having trouble managing money responsibly." The irony was breathtaking. My parents, who had accumulated $53,000 in debt through cryptocurrency gambling and lifestyle inflation, had been telling people that I was financially irresponsible. They had created a narrative that justified their behavior while preemptively discrediting any criticism I might raise. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to know that none of that is true. I've never had trouble managing money or emotional problems with school. I graduated yesterday with a 4.0 average. She studied my face carefully. Yesterday was your graduation, but the party was for the Super Bowl. They chose to host a Super Bowl party instead of attending my graduation ceremony. I watched understanding dawn in her eyes. Mrs. Patterson was a retired teacher, and I could see her connecting the pieces of information in ways my parents had never expected anyone to do. Oh, Cindy, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. You were trying to help someone you thought needed support. She was quiet for a long moment. Have they asked you for money recently? This morning. They want my signing bonus and first several paychecks to save the house from foreclosure. Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened. That house should have been paid off years ago. They took out a second mortgage about 5 years back, said it was for home improvements. Home improvements that I had never seen. The house looked exactly the same as it had throughout my childhood. Where had that money gone? Mrs. Patterson, if I wanted to understand my parents' financial history, how would I go about that? She thought for a moment. My late husband was an accountant. He always said that people who ask for money frequently usually have patterns of financial behavior that go back years. Have you checked public records? I had not even considered public records. Property transactions, bankruptcy filings, and legal judgments were all matters of public information. If my parents had a history of financial irresponsibility, there would be documentation. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson, for everything, and I'm sorry my parents misled you about my situation. Don't apologize for their choices, dear. You just focus on taking care of yourself. After she left, I returned to the garage and continued searching through boxes. In a container labeled tax documents, I found records that painted an even more disturbing picture of my parents' financial behavior. For the past 10 years, they had been claiming me as a dependent while simultaneously reporting educational expenses that entitled them to significant tax credits and deductions. They had been double-dipping, collecting money from relatives for my education, while also reducing their tax burden by claiming those same educational expenses. The total amount of tax benefits related to my education was over $12,000. Money they had received from the government based on expenses they had not actually paid, since my schooling had been funded through student loans and money donated by family members. I found copies of letters they had sent to relatives, each one carefully crafted to maximize emotional impact while minimizing specific details about their financial situation. The letters mentioned unexpected medical expenses, temporary job market challenges, and investment setbacks beyond our control. None of the letters mentioned cryptocurrency trading, expensive home entertainment systems, or the luxury vacation they had taken to Hawaii last year while I was working double shifts to pay for nursing school supplies. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Did you have a chance to think about our conversation this morning? Time is running short. I stared at the message, surrounded by evidence of their systematic deception and financial manipulation. They were not asking for help during a temporary crisis. They were recruiting me into a pattern of behavior that had been ongoing for years. My parents had been using my achievements as a fundraising tool while simultaneously sabotaging my opportunities for independence. The community college route had kept me at home longer, made me more financially dependent, and given them more time to establish me as their primary financial resource. I thought about the full scholarships to prestigious universities, opportunities that could have launched me toward a completely different future. Instead, I had spent 4 years accumulating student loan debt while living under the roof of people who viewed my success as their personal profit center. The garage felt suffocating as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. This was not about helping family through a rough patch. This was about maintaining a system where my achievements served their financial needs while my independence remained perpetually delayed. I needed to understand what other opportunities they had hidden from me and what lies they had told to maintain control over my future. But most importantly, I needed to decide whether I was going to allow this pattern to continue or whether yesterday's graduation was going to mark the beginning of my real independence. Armed with the devastating evidence of my parents' deception, I returned to the house to confront them about the hidden scholarships and stolen education money. I found them in the living room, surrounded by financial documents and speaking in urgent whispers. Their conversation stopped abruptly when I entered. "Cindy, perfect timing." Bob said, his voice artificially cheerful. "We've been working on a comprehensive financial plan that shows exactly how your contribution would get us back on track." I placed the stack of unopened scholarship letters on the coffee table between us. "Before we discuss my contribution, I'd like you to explain these." Janet's face went pale as she recognized the envelopes. Bob leaned forward, squinting at the return addresses, and I watched realization wash over his features. "Where did you find those?" Janet asked quietly. "In my storage box in the garage, along with bank statements showing that relatives have been giving you money for my education. Money you've been spending on yourselves." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Bob cleared his throat and attempted his patented authoritative tone. "Cindy, I think you're misunderstanding the situation here. My Indiana University offered me a full scholarship 4 years ago. So did Ohio State, Michigan, and Purdue. Full tuition room and board. Why didn't I know about these offers?" Janet looked at her hands. "We discussed this as a family and decided community college was the better choice." "We never discussed anything. You intercepted my mail and made decisions about my future without telling me." Bob's defensive posture kicked in. "We're your parents, Cindy. It's our job to guide your decisions and protect you from making mistakes. Protect me from free education at prestigious universities. Protect you from leaving home before you were ready," Janet said softly. "You were only 18. We weren't comfortable with you living so far away, especially at such large schools where you could easily get lost in the system." The explanation sounded rehearsed, as if they had prepared for this conversation long ago, but it did not address the financial deception or the money they had collected under false pretenses. "What about the education fund grandmother has been sending money for my college expenses, and you've been using it for credit card payments?" Bob's face reddened. "That money went toward household expenses that supported your education indirectly. Keeping a roof over your head, providing meals, maintaining a stable environment for studying. Grandmother specifically earmarked that money for tuition and books. And we provided those things through alternative means," Janet added quickly. "Student loans, your part-time job income, our own contributions when possible." They were twisting reality to make their theft sound like creative financial management. In their version of events, stealing donated education money was actually a sophisticated budgeting strategy that benefited everyone involved. "Mrs. Patterson told me you've been asking neighbors for money too," I continued, "and that you told people I was having emotional and financial problems." Janet's composure finally cracked. "Mrs. Patterson needs to mind her own business. She was trying to help someone she thought was struggling, because you lied to her." Bob stood up and began pacing the living room. "This whole conversation is getting out of hand. The bottom line is that we raised you, supported you through school, and now we're facing a temporary financial setback. Family members help each other during difficult times. You've been facing financial setbacks for years. This isn't temporary, and you haven't supported me through school. I've supported myself while you profited from donations people made thinking they were helping me." "That's enough," Bob snapped. "You're being incredibly ungrateful and disrespectful." "I'm being honest." Janet tried a different approach. "Sweetie, I know you're upset about the graduation ceremony. We should have prioritized better. But this mortgage situation is urgent, and we need to focus on solutions rather than dwelling on past mistakes." Past mistakes. They were already minimizing yesterday's betrayal and attempting to redirect my attention toward their current financial crisis. The pattern was becoming clear: create a crisis demand, immediate action, dismiss any criticism as irrelevant to the urgent situation at hand. My phone rang, displaying a number I did not recognize. "Hello?" "Cindy, this is Derek Matthews. Your parents gave me your number. I was hoping we could talk." Derek Matthews. I remembered him vaguely from high school, though we had never been close friends. He was a year older and had played football with some of the guys in my graduating class. "I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of something important right now." "Actually, this is related to your current situation. Your parents called me because they're concerned about some decisions you're considering. I looked at Bob and Janet, who were watching my face intently. What decisions? They mentioned you're thinking about moving away for work, and they're worried you might be making an impulsive choice based on stress from graduation and financial pressures. My parents had contacted someone I barely knew to intervene in my personal decisions. Derek was being recruited as another voice in their campaign to keep me local and financially available. Derek, I appreciate your concern, but my career choices are really not your business. I understand that. But your parents are good people who care about you, and they mentioned you've been having some troubles lately that might be affecting your judgment. There it was again. The narrative about my supposed emotional instability and poor decision-making abilities. They were spreading this story to anyone who might influence me to stay. What kind of troubles did they mention? Nothing specific, just that you've been overwhelmed with school stress and maybe not thinking as clearly as usual about major life decisions. I hung up the phone and turned to face my parents. You called Derek Matthews. We're worried about you, Janet said defensively. You're talking about refusing to help your family during a crisis, and that doesn't sound like the Cindy we raised. You're manipulating people into thinking I'm mentally unstable. We're reaching out to people who care about you and asking them to provide perspective during a stressful time, Bob corrected. The doorbell rang and Janet brightened. That must be Derek. I invited him over to talk with you in person. Derek Matthews stood on our front porch looking uncomfortable but determined. At 25, he had the build of someone who still worked out regularly, and his earnest expression suggested he genuinely believed he was helping a friend in need. Cindy, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. Your parents are really worried about you. Come in, Derek, Janet said warmly. We were just having a family discussion about some important decisions. Derek stepped into the living room and glanced around at the financial documents scattered across every surface. This looks like a lot of stress for everyone involved. Derek, I said carefully, what exactly did my parents tell you? He looked between Bob and Janet, clearly uncomfortable with being put in the middle of a family conflict. They said you've been having a tough time with the pressure of finishing school and starting your career, and that you might be making some choices that could hurt your relationship with your family, such as refusing to help them through a temporary financial problem, and maybe considering job opportunities that would take you far away from your support system. Support system. My parents had branded themselves as my emotional foundation while simultaneously undermining my independence and stealing money intended for my education. Derek, did they mention that they missed my graduation yesterday to host a Super Bowl party? His expression shifted. No, they said graduation was sometime this week. It was yesterday afternoon. They chose not to attend because they had already planned a party. Derek looked at my parents seeking confirmation or denial. Bob shifted uncomfortably. The timing was unfortunate, but we had already committed to hosting the neighborhood gathering. For the Super Bowl. It's an annual tradition, Janet added quickly. People depend on us to organize the event. Derek was quiet for a long moment, processing the discrepancy between the story he had been told and the reality in front of him. So you missed your daughter's college graduation for a football party. The situation is more complicated than it appears, Bob said. How is it more complicated? I decided to lay out the complete truth. Derek, they've been intercepting my mail for 4 years, hiding full scholarship offers from prestigious universities. They've been collecting money from family and neighbors supposedly for my education, but using it for their own expenses. They've told people throughout the neighborhood that I have emotional and financial problems to justify constantly asking for money. And now they want me to give them my signing bonus and first several paychecks to save them from foreclosure. Derek stared at my parents. Is that true? Bob's face turned red. She's exaggerating and taking things out of context. Which part is exaggerated? All of it. We made some financial decisions on Cindy's behalf because that's what parents do. We accepted help from people who offered it. And we're currently facing some temporary setbacks that require family cooperation to resolve. Derek looked at the scholarship letters still scattered on the coffee table. These are rejection letters. Those are acceptance letters, I said. Full scholarships that I never knew about because my parents hid them from me. Derek picked up one of the letters and read it carefully. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he processed the contents. This is a full ride to Indiana University. Dated 4 years ago, I added. Derek set down the letter and looked at my parents with an expression I had never seen him wear. You kept her from getting a free education at a major university. We kept her close to home where she would be safe and supported, Janet said defensively. By lying to her. By making parental decisions based on what we believed was best for our daughter. Derek turned to me. Cindy, I think I owe you an apology. I came here thinking I was helping someone who was confused and making poor choices, but it sounds like you're the only person in this room who has been making good choices. Derek, you don't understand the full situation, Bob began. I understand enough. You lied to your daughter about educational opportunities, you've been taking money under false pretenses, and you missed her graduation for a football party. Now you want her to bail you out of debt you created through your own poor decisions. It's not that simple, Janet protested. It sounds exactly that simple. Derek turned back to me. Whatever you decide to do about this situation, you have my support. And I'm sorry I believed what they told me about you without hearing your side first. After Derek left, the house fell into tense silence. My parents sat side by side on the couch, presenting their united front, while I remained standing with the evidence of their deception spread around me. Well, Bob said finally, I hope you're proud of yourself for airing our private family business to outsiders. I'm proud of myself for telling the truth. The truth according to your perspective, Janet corrected. You're interpreting our actions in the worst possible light instead of recognizing that everything we've done has been motivated by love and concern for your welfare. Love and concern. They were reframing theft, deception, and manipulation as parental affection. In their minds, hiding my opportunities and stealing my education money had been acts of protection rather than betrayal. If you love me, why did you miss my graduation? We explained that already, Bob said with exasperation. The timing was unfortunate. The timing was your choice. You chose the party over my graduation. We chose to honor a commitment we had made to our friends and neighbors. What about your commitment to me? Neither of them had an answer for that question. The silence stretched until Janet finally spoke. Cindy, regardless of whatever mistakes we may have made in the past, we're facing a crisis right now. The bank wants an answer by Friday. If you refuse to help us, we will lose our home. Then maybe you should contact a bankruptcy attorney instead of asking me to sacrifice my future for your mistakes. Bob slammed his hand on the coffee table. This house is your future too. This is where you grew up, where your mother and I have built our life together. When we're gone someday, all of this will belong to you anyway. I don't want a house that comes with $50,000 in debt and a history of foreclosure proceedings. That debt is temporary, Janet insisted. Once we get caught up on the mortgage and establish a payment plan for the credit cards, we'll be fine. Based on what income, Dad doesn't have a job, and cryptocurrency trading isn't a reliable source of revenue. Bob's face flushed darker. I'm working on several promising opportunities that should generate significant returns within the next few months. More gambling. Investment strategies that require time to mature. We were talking in circles, and I could see that my parents were never going to acknowledge the fundamental problems with their approach to money and responsibility. They would continue to create crises and expect other people to solve them because that strategy had worked for years. I'm not giving you my signing bonus, I said finally. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Bob and Janet stared at me with identical expressions of shock and anger. Then we'll lose everything, Janet whispered. You've already lost everything. You just haven't admitted it yet. I gathered the scholarship letters and bank statements, preparing to return them to my room. I'm going to spend the rest of today researching your options for financial assistance bankruptcy proceedings and foreclosure alternatives. Tomorrow, we can discuss realistic solutions that don't involve me funding your lifestyle indefinitely. Lifestyle indefinitely, Bob exploded. We're asking for temporary help during a crisis. You've been in crisis mode for years. The only thing that's changed is that you've finally run out of other people's money to spend. I left them sitting in the wreckage of their financial empire, surrounded by documents that proved their inability to manage money responsibly. The truth was finally out in the open, but I suspected this was only the beginning of a much larger battle for my independence and future. That evening, I sat in my childhood bedroom and made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and began researching job opportunities in other state cities far enough away that my parents could not simply show up at my doorstep or recruit my neighbors to intervene in my choices. It was time to find out who I could become when I was no longer subsidizing their mistakes. That night, I stayed awake until 3 a.m, researching nursing opportunities across the country. Seattle, Portland, Denver, Atlanta. Charlotte, major cities with excellent hospitals and starting salaries significantly higher than what Cleveland General had offered. The more I read about career prospects outside Ohio, the more I realized how limited my perspective had been. At dawn, I dressed quietly and drove to campus to meet with Dr. Sarah Williams, the career services director who had helped me navigate the job market throughout my final semester. Her office was in the nursing building, surrounded by bulletin boards covered with employment opportunities and graduate school information. "Cindy, congratulations again on graduating summa cum laude. How are you feeling about starting at Cleveland General next month?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. Are there other opportunities available, maybe in different cities?" Dr. Williams looked surprised. "Of course there are. Is something wrong with the Cleveland position?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about my family situation. I'm reconsidering my options and wondering if I should explore positions that might offer more growth potential. "That's very wise thinking. The nursing job market is incredibly strong right now, especially for graduates with your credentials." She pulled out a thick folder from her filing cabinet. "I have contacts at hospitals throughout the country. What type of environment interests you most?" "Somewhere with opportunities for advancement, good continuing education programs, and..." I paused, searching for the right words, somewhere I could really establish my independence. Dr. Williams studied my face carefully. "Cindy, is everything all right? You seem stressed about something beyond typical career planning." The kindness in her voice broke down my carefully maintained composure. "My family situation has become complicated. I need to know what options exist for starting my career somewhere new." "I see. Well, let me tell you about some opportunities that might interest you." She spread several folders across her desk. "Seattle General has an excellent new graduate program with a mentorship component and tuition assistance for advanced degrees. University of Colorado Hospital in Denver offers specialized training in emergency medicine. And there's a fascinating position in Charlotte at Presbyterian Medical Center working with underserved populations." Each opportunity sounded better than the local position I had accepted. Higher salaries, better benefits, and the chance to work in specialized fields that had always interested me, but seemed impossible to pursue while staying close to home. "Dr. Williams, can I ask you something confidential?" "Of course." "Have you ever had other employers contact you about me? Maybe asking questions about my qualifications or character?" Her expression shifted to concern. "Actually, yes. I received several calls over the past year from hospitals where you had applied. They were asking about your reliability and professional references." "What kind of questions?" "Unusual questions, honestly. Things like whether you had a history of financial problems or emotional instability. Questions that made me uncomfortable because they seemed inappropriate for standard employment verification." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth that you're one of our most outstanding graduates with impeccable academic and clinical records, but I was confused about why they were asking such personal questions." "Did they say who had raised concerns about me?" Dr. Williams was quiet for a moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. "The calls claimed to be following up on concerns raised by your family references. They said there were questions about your maturity level and ability to handle the responsibilities of moving away from home." "Family references?" My parents had been sabotaging my job opportunities by contacting potential employers and raising questions about my mental stability and professional competence. They had been systematically destroying my chances of finding work outside their control. Dr. Williams, those calls were completely false. My parents have been interfering with my job applications because they want me to stay local. Her face hardened. That's unconscionable. No parent has the right to sabotage their child's career opportunities. Is there any way to repair the damage? Are those hospitals still hiring? Let me make some calls. I know the nurse recruiters at most of these facilities personally, and they trust my judgment. If I explain that you were the victim of deliberate misinformation, they'll likely be very interested in reconsidering your applications. Dr. Williams spent the next hour on the phone while I sat in stunned silence processing the scope of my parents' interference. They had not just hidden scholarship opportunities, they had actively sabotaged my career prospects to ensure I remained financially dependent and geographically trapped. "Cindy, I have excellent news," she said after completing her final call. "Seattle General is very interested in speaking with you. Their nurse recruiter, Jennifer Hughes, remembers your application and was disappointed when they received concerning information about your background. She's eager to schedule a phone interview this afternoon if you're available." This afternoon. She said they have an immediate opening in their emergency department, and they're looking for someone with your academic credentials. The position includes a significant signing bonus and relocation assistance. A significant signing bonus and relocation assistance. Everything I needed to escape my parents' financial manipulation and start fresh in a city where they could not control my opportunities or reputation. Yes, I'm very interested. Dr. Williams handed me a folder containing detailed information about the Seattle position. "Jennifer will call you at 2 this afternoon. Cindy, I want you to know that what your parents did was completely unethical. You have every right to pursue opportunities without their interference." I left the Career Services office with hope for the first time in weeks. Within hours, I could be interviewing for a position that would allow me to leave Ohio and start my career on my own terms. The phone interview with Jennifer Hughes exceeded my expectations. She was warm, professional, and genuinely excited about my qualifications. The position offered a $12,000 signing bonus, full relocation assistance, and enrollment in their advanced emergency medicine training program. "Cindy, based on our conversation and your academic record, I'd like to extend an official offer. Can you start in 3 weeks? 3 weeks. Enough time to pack my belongings and arrange transportation, but not enough time for my parents to devise new strategies to keep me local. I accept." "Wonderful. I'll send the paperwork to your email address this afternoon. Welcome to Seattle General Hospital." After ending the call, I sat in my car in the campus parking lot feeling simultaneously elated and terrified. I had just accepted a position 2,000 miles from home, effectively ending my parents' ability to control my finances and future. But first, I needed to execute my departure without alerting them to my plans. If they discovered my intention to leave before I was ready, they would escalate their manipulation tactics and potentially make my escape impossible. I drove to a storage facility across town and rented a small unit under my name only. Over the next several days, I would gradually move my important belongings there while maintaining the appearance of normal routine at home. That evening, I researched apartments in Seattle and found a furnished studio near the hospital that would allow me to start working immediately upon arrival. The rent was higher than anything I had ever paid, but my new salary would easily cover living expenses while I established myself in the city. I opened a new bank account at a different financial institution and arranged for my final paycheck from my campus job to be deposited there instead of my regular account. Every financial connection to my parents needed to be severed before they could freeze my access to money or claim joint ownership of my resources. The hardest part was maintaining normal behavior around Bob and Janet while secretly planning my departure. During dinner, they continued pressuring me about the mortgage crisis and questioning my selfishness in refusing to help family during difficult times. "The bank called again today," Janet announced while passing the mashed potatoes. "They're scheduling the foreclosure proceedings for next month, unless we can bring the payments current." "That's unfortunate," I replied neutrally. "Unfortunate," Bob exploded. "It's devastating. We're going to lose our home because our daughter refuses to show basic family loyalty. Have you considered bankruptcy or mortgage modification? We've considered asking our only child to step up during a crisis like any decent person would do." Their guilt tactics no longer affected me because I understood the true nature of our relationship. I was not their daughter in any meaningful sense. I was their financial resource, and they were panicking because that resource was about to become unavailable. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said, finishing my dinner. That night, I began transferring clothes and personal items to my storage unit. Books, photograph albums, important documents, and anything with sentimental value went into boxes that I transported in small loads to avoid suspicion. I also researched legal protections for young adults whose parents had committed financial fraud. The evidence I had discovered in the garage could support criminal charges for identity theft, mail fraud, and financial abuse. If my parents escalated their behavior, I wanted to understand my legal options. By the end of the week, I had secretly relocated most of my belongings and confirmed my start date at Seattle General. My one-way plane ticket was booked for the following Monday, giving me just enough time to complete the transition without providing opportunity for intervention. But as I lay in bed Sunday night listening to my parents argue about money in the next room, I realized that my escape plan was about to be tested in ways I had not anticipated. Tomorrow morning, I would tell them I was leaving for Seattle permanently, and their reaction would determine whether my departure was peaceful or required more dramatic measures. I fell asleep holding my plane ticket, knowing that within 24 hours, everything would change forever. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for February, as if the weather was conspiring to make my departure day perfect. I had planned to tell my parents about Seattle after they finished their morning coffee, hoping to avoid a confrontation that would make my afternoon flight more difficult. But when I entered the kitchen, Bob was sitting at the computer with a confused expression on his face. "Cindy, did you print something yesterday? There's a confirmation email in the printer history that doesn't make sense." My heart stopped. I had printed my boarding pass the previous evening and thought I had cleared the browser history completely. "What kind of confirmation?" "Alaska Airlines, Seattle to Columbus one way, departing today." The room fell silent except for the humming of the refrigerator. Janet looked up from her newspaper with growing alarm as she processed what Bob had discovered. "Why would you print a boarding pass for Seattle?" she asked carefully. There was no point in lying anymore. My escape plan had been discovered 12 hours before my intended departure, leaving me vulnerable to whatever tactics they decided to employ. "Because I'm moving to Seattle today. I accepted a position at Seattle General Hospital." Bob stared at me as if I had announced my intention to join a cult. "You accepted a job in Seattle when, last week. I start next Monday." Janet's face went through several emotional stages in rapid succession: confusion, understanding panic, and finally rage. "You've been planning to abandon us during our financial crisis, while we're facing foreclosure." "I've been planning to start my career and my adult life." "Your adult life is here," Bob said firmly, "with your family and your community where you belong. My adult life is wherever I choose to make it." Janet stood up so quickly that her chair toppled backward. "You cannot move to Seattle, Cindy. We won't allow it." "You won't allow it? I'm 22 years old." "You're 22 and making a catastrophic mistake based on some fantasy about independence and adventure. Real life doesn't work like that." Bob joined Janet in what was clearly going to be a coordinated effort to prevent my departure. "Cindy, sit down. We need to have a serious conversation about this nonsense." "There's nothing to discuss. My decision is made." "Your decision is made based on incomplete information and emotional immaturity," Janet snapped. "You have no idea what it's like to live alone in a strange city without family support." "Then I'll learn." "You'll fail," Bob said bluntly. "And when you come crawling back home in 6 months, broke and exhausted, and realizing that we were right all along, this house might not exist anymore, because you refused to help us when we needed you most." Their strategy was becoming clear. If they could not appeal to my sense of family obligation, they would try to convince me that I was incapable of succeeding independently. The same narrative of incompetence they had been spreading throughout the neighborhood. "I need to finish packing," I said, heading toward my bedroom. "You're not going anywhere," Janet called after me. "We're calling Dr. Williams right now to explain that you're having some kind of breakdown and making irrational decisions." I stopped walking. Dr. Williams is the one who helped me get the job in Seattle. She knows exactly what's happening here. What's happening here is that our daughter is having a mental health crisis and needs professional intervention, Bob said loudly. Mental health crisis. They were escalating to psychological manipulation, trying to convince me and anyone else who would listen that my desire for independence was evidence of mental illness. I'm not having a mental health crisis. I'm making a rational decision to leave a toxic situation. Toxic situation. Janet's voice rose to a near shriek. This is your family. The people who love you and have sacrificed everything for your success. You've sacrificed nothing. You've stolen money intended for my education and sabotaged my career opportunities to keep me financially dependent. We've made difficult decisions to keep you safe and close to home, Bob corrected. And now you want to throw away everything we've built together for some pipe dream about living in Seattle. Janet disappeared into the other room and returned with our house phone. "I'm calling Derek Matthews. He needs to talk sense into you before you destroy your life." "Janet, don't you dare call Derek." But she was already dialing. I could hear the phone ringing through the speaker. "Derek, thank goodness you answered. Cindy is having some kind of emotional breakdown. She's talking about moving to Seattle today and we think she needs professional help." I grabbed the phone from her hand. "Derek, this is Cindy. I'm not having a breakdown. I accepted a job offer and I'm moving to Seattle to start my career." "Cindy," Derek's voice was confused. "Your mom sounds really upset. What's going on?" "What's going on is that I'm leaving today and my parents are panicking because they wanted me to give them my signing bonus to pay their mortgage." "You're actually moving to Seattle today?" "Yes, my flight leaves at 3 this afternoon." There was a long pause. "And your parents don't want you to go?" "My parents want me to stay here indefinitely and use my salary to subsidize their lifestyle." Bob snatched the phone back. "Derek, she's not thinking clearly. Can you come over here and help us talk through this situation rationally?" "I'll be right there," Derek replied. After Janet hung up, my parents positioned themselves between me and the front door like prison guards. "You're not leaving this house until we resolve this situation," Bob announced. "You can't hold me prisoner. We can protect you from making the biggest mistake of your life." I retreated to my bedroom and called Dr. Williams from my cell phone. "Dr. Williams. This is Cindy. My parents discovered my travel plans and they're trying to prevent me from leaving for Seattle. Are you safe?" "For now, but they've called someone to come over and help them convince me I'm having a mental breakdown." "Cindy, listen to me carefully. You are an adult with the legal right to make your own decisions. If your parents physically prevent you from leaving or threaten you in any way, you should call the police immediately." "I don't want to have my parents arrested." "Then they need to respect your choices. Is there somewhere safe you can go while you wait for your flight?" Before I could answer, Derek arrived. I heard his voice mixing with my parents in the living room, followed by footsteps approaching my bedroom door. "Cindy," Derek knocked gently. "Can we talk?" I opened the door to find Derek standing alone. "Where are my parents?" "I asked them to give us some privacy. Can I come in?" I stepped aside and Derek entered my childhood bedroom with the cautious expression of someone entering a potential minefield. "Your parents are really scared," he said carefully. "They should be. They're about to lose their primary source of income." Derek sat on the edge of my bed. "They said you're moving to Seattle without any warning, leaving them in financial crisis." "I'm moving to Seattle to start my career. Their financial crisis existed long before I got involved. But if you could help them get caught up on their mortgage, wouldn't that be worth delaying your plans for a few months?" I stared at Derek, realizing that despite everything he had witnessed last week, he was still susceptible to my parents' manipulation. They had successfully reframed the situation as a temporary emergency rather than a long-term pattern of irresponsible behavior. "Derek, they've been lying to you. Again." How have they been lying? I pulled out my phone and showed him the emails from Seattle General. This job offer came after they sabotaged my applications to other hospitals by calling and claiming I was mentally unstable. They've been systematically destroying my career opportunities to keep me trapped here. Derek read the email correspondence, his expression growing more troubled with each message. They called hospitals and said you were mentally unstable. Dr. Williams confirmed it. Multiple employers contacted her asking about my emotional problems and financial irresponsibility based on concerns supposedly raised by my family. Derek was quiet for several minutes processing this new information. Your parents told me you were making an impulsive decision based on stress, he said finally. I'm making a carefully planned decision based on evidence that they view me as their personal financial resource rather than their daughter. And you really think moving to Seattle is the right choice? I think removing myself from a situation where I'm being manipulated and lied to is the right choice. Derek stood up and walked to my bedroom window, looking out at the driveway where his car was parked behind my parents' vehicles. Cindy, if you really want to leave, I'll drive you to the airport. The offer surprised me. You will. Your parents asked me to talk sense into you, but it sounds like you're the only person in this house who's been making sense for a while. Relief flooded through me. With Derek's support, I could leave without worrying about my parents following me to the airport or creating a public scene that would delay my departure. Thank you. But first you need to tell them yourself. They deserve to hear your decision directly from you, even if they don't like it. Derek was right. I needed to face my parents and officially end this relationship on my terms, not by sneaking away while they were distracted. We returned to the living room where Bob and Janet were huddled together on the couch, whispering urgently. They looked up expectantly when Derek and I entered. Well, Janet asked hopefully, did you explain to her how unrealistic this Seattle plan is? Derek looked at me and nodded encouragingly. Mom, Dad, I want you to understand something clearly. I began. I'm leaving for Seattle today. This decision is final and I won't be changing my mind. Bob's face darkened. Then you're choosing to abandon your family when we need you most. I'm choosing to start my adult life free from people who have been lying to me and stealing from me for years. We never stole anything from you, Janet protested. You stole my scholarship opportunities, my education fund money, and my career prospects. You've been committing fraud for years using my name and reputation. That's enough, Bob stood up menacingly. I won't sit here and listen to you accuse us of criminal behavior because you're angry about some parenting decisions you disagree with. Derek stepped forward. Bob, she's not accusing you. She's stating facts based on evidence she discovered. Stay out of this, Derek. This is a family matter. It stopped being a family matter when you asked me to get involved, Derek replied firmly. Janet began crying, though I suspected the tears were more strategic than genuine. Cindy, please, we're begging you, don't do this to us. Don't do what live my own life. Don't abandon us when we need you most. Don't choose strangers in Seattle over the people who raised you and love you. The people who raised me would have attended my graduation. The people who love me wouldn't steal my education money or sabotage my career opportunities. Bob moved closer to me, his expression shifting from anger to something more threatening. You're not leaving this house, Cindy. I don't care how old you think you are. Derek immediately positioned himself between Bob and me. That's enough, Bob. She's an adult and you don't get to make that choice for her. She's my daughter, and as long as she's living under my roof, she'll follow my rules. Then it's fortunate that she won't be living under your roof much longer, Derek said calmly. The confrontation was escalating beyond verbal manipulation into potential physical intimidation. It was time to leave before the situation became dangerous. Derek, I think we should go now. Janet made one final desperate appeal. Cindy, if you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcome back when this fantasy falls apart. We won't be here to pick up the pieces when you realize you made a mistake. Good, I replied. I wouldn't want to come back to people who view helping their daughter as picking up the pieces. As Derek and I headed toward the front door, Bob called after us with a final threat. I hope you know that your nursing license can be revoked for unprofessional conduct. There are ways to make sure you never work in healthcare again. I stopped walking and turned around. Are you threatening to sabotage my nursing license? I'm informing you that actions have consequences, and some consequences are permanent. Derek looked shocked. Bob, you're talking about destroying your daughter's career out of spite. I'm talking about protecting her from making decisions she'll regret for the rest of her life. But his threat had revealed the true depth of his willingness to control my future through destructive means. If I stayed, they would continue finding ways to manipulate and threaten me indefinitely. If I left, they might try to destroy my career out of revenge. Either way, the relationship was over. The only question was whether I would face their retaliation from Ohio or from Seattle, and Seattle seemed infinitely preferable. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Dad. I walked out of my childhood home knowing I would never return as their dependent daughter. Whatever happened next, it would be on my terms, in my chosen city surrounded by people who supported my independence rather than people who profited from my dependence. Derek drove me to the airport in supportive silence, allowing me to process the emotional weight of severing ties with the people who had raised me. As painful as the break had been, I felt lighter with every mile we traveled away from their house. My new life was waiting in Seattle, and for the first time in years, the future felt entirely my own. The flight to Seattle provided 3 hours of peaceful silence to process everything that had transpired in the past week. As I stared out the airplane window at the landscape passing below, I felt simultaneously heartbroken and liberated. The confrontation with my parents had been more brutal than I had expected, but it had also clarified the true nature of our relationship. My phone buzzed with notifications throughout the flight, texts from my mother ranging from tearful apologies to angry accusations, voicemails from my father threatening legal action if I did not return immediately. I turned off my phone and focused on the packets of information Seattle General Hospital had sent about employee housing and orientation procedures. But when I landed in Seattle and turned my phone back on, I found a voicemail from a number I did not recognize. The message was from someone who identified himself as my Uncle Marcus, my father's younger brother, whom I had not seen in several years. Cindy, this is Uncle Marcus. I just heard about what happened with your parents, and I think we need to talk immediately. There are some things you need to know about your family's financial history that might change your perspective on this entire situation. Please call me back as soon as you get this message. Uncle Marcus worked in banking and had always seemed like the most financially responsible member of our extended family. If anyone would understand the magnitude of my parents' debt crisis, it would be him. But his urgent tone suggested this was about more than providing advice about mortgage assistance programs. I called him back from the Seattle airport while waiting for my luggage. Cindy, thank God you called. Where are you right now? Seattle. I moved here for a nursing position. Good. That's probably the safest place for you to be right now. Safest? What do you mean? I mean, your parents have been lying to everyone about much more than you realize. I've been investigating their financial situation since Bob called me yesterday asking for money, and what I discovered is going to shock you. My luggage appeared on the carousel, but I remained frozen in place. What did you discover? Your parents have been using your grandmother's inheritance as collateral for loans and investments without telling you that money belongs to you. Grandmother's inheritance. My paternal grandmother had passed away 2 years ago, but no one had mentioned any inheritance intended for me. I don't understand. Your grandmother left explicit instructions in her will that $50,000 was to be held in trust for you until you turned 25, specifically to help you establish independence from your parents. She was concerned about their financial management and wanted to ensure you had resources they could not access. $50,000, a sum that would have completely changed my options for college career choices and independence. Money that my grandmother had specifically protected from my parents' influence, but somehow they had gained control over it anyway. Where is that money now? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Gone. Your parents convinced the probate court that they were better qualified to manage the inheritance on your behalf. They provided documentation showing you were emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible, so the judge modified the trust terms to give them control. The same lies they had been spreading throughout my neighborhood and to potential employers. They had used their false narrative about my mental health to steal my inheritance from my grandmother's estate. How is that legal? It's legal because they committed fraud by providing false documentation about your mental state and financial competence. They had Derek Matthews sign a statement claiming he had witnessed concerning behavior that suggested you could not manage money responsibly. Derek Matthews, the same Derek who had just driven me to the airport and supported my decision to leave. Either my parents had forged his signature or he had been manipulating me from the beginning. Did Derek really sign something like that? According to the court documents, yes. But Cindy, there's more. Your parents used that $50,000 as seed money for your father's cryptocurrency investments. When those failed, they took out loans using your inheritance as collateral. They've essentially gambling with money that legally belongs to you. The scope of their betrayal was expanding beyond anything I had imagined. Not only had they stolen money intended for my education and sabotaged my career opportunities, but they had also defrauded the legal system to gain access to inheritance money, specifically protected from their financial irresponsibility. Uncle Marcus, what can I do about this? You can file criminal charges for fraud, identity theft, and theft of inheritance. You can also file civil suits to recover the money and damages. But first, you need to see the original documentation. What original documentation? Your grandmother wrote several letters explaining her concerns about your parents' financial behavior and her reasons for protecting your inheritance from their influence. She gave copies to me before she died because she was worried they would try to circumvent her wishes. Letters from my grandmother explaining her concerns about my parents, evidence that she had recognized their manipulative behavior and tried to protect me from it even after her death. Can you send me copies of those letters? I can do better than that. I'm flying to Seattle tomorrow. This situation needs to be addressed immediately, and you're going to need legal representation to recover your inheritance and protect yourself from further fraud. After ending the call with Uncle Marcus, I took the airport shuttle to my temporary housing near Seattle General Hospital. The furnished studio apartment was small but clean, with a view of the hospital campus where I would begin work on Monday. As I unpacked my few belongings, I tried to process everything Uncle Marcus had told me. My grandmother had tried to protect me from my parents' financial manipulation by leaving me an inheritance they could not access. But they had circumvented her wishes through fraud and perjury, stealing money specifically intended to help me achieve independence. The cruelest irony was that they had stolen the very money that would have made their current financial crisis unnecessary. If they had respected my grandmother's wishes and allowed me to receive the inheritance at 25, I would have had resources to help them responsibly while maintaining my own financial security. Instead, they had gambled away my inheritance and then expected me to sacrifice my career earnings to replace the money they had stolen. My phone rang again. This time, the number belonged to Derek Matthews. "Cindy, I've been trying to reach you since you landed. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but I have a question for you." "What's that?" "Did you sign a statement for my parents claiming that I was mentally unstable and could not manage money responsibly?" The silence on the other end of the call lasted so long that I thought we had been disconnected. "Derek, how did you find out about that?" "So you did sign it?" "Cindy, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You helped my parents steal my inheritance by lying about my mental state to a probate court judge. They told me it was to protect you from making bad decisions with a large sum of money. They said your grandmother had left you $50,000, but that you were too young and inexperienced to handle that kind of responsibility. And you believed that... You were 19 years old, Cindy. $50,000 is a lot of money for someone that young to manage. Derek had genuinely believed he was protecting me from financial irresponsibility by helping my parents gain control over my inheritance. The same parents who had accumulated $53,000 in debt through cryptocurrency gambling and luxury spending. Derek, did you know they used that inheritance money for cryptocurrency investments? What? My inheritance. The money you helped them steal from me. They gambled it away on cryptocurrency and lost everything. Another long silence. Cindy, I had no idea. They told me they were putting the money into conservative investments until you were more mature. They lied to you, just like they've been lying to everyone else. I'm so sorry. If you had known what? If you had known they were financially irresponsible people who were stealing from their daughter. All the evidence was right there. Derek, you just chose to believe their version of events instead of thinking critically about the situation. Derek's betrayal hurt differently than my parents' behavior because I had begun to trust him as an ally. But he had been complicit in their fraud even if his motivations had seemed protective rather than malicious. What can I do to make this right? He asked. You can testify truthfully if this goes to court. You can admit that you signed that statement based on false information provided by my parents. Of course, whatever it takes. After ending the call with Derek, I sat in my new apartment and tried to comprehend the full scope of what had been done to me. My parents had systematically sabotaged my opportunities for independence while stealing money specifically intended to provide me with financial security. They had manipulated well-meaning people into participating in their fraud by creating false narratives about my character and mental health. But most painfully, they had betrayed the trust my grandmother had placed in them as family members who would respect her wishes and protect her granddaughter's future. Tomorrow, Uncle Marcus would arrive with evidence that could support criminal charges and civil litigation. The question was whether I wanted to pursue legal action against my own parents, knowing that such a decision would permanently sever any possibility of family reconciliation. As I prepared for my first night in Seattle, I realized that the decision had already been made for me. My parents had chosen to treat me as a financial resource rather than a family member. They had chosen to steal from me rather than seek legitimate help for their financial problems. They had chosen to manipulate and defraud multiple people rather than take responsibility for their mistakes. The family relationship I thought I was fighting to preserve had never actually existed. I had been subsidizing their lifestyle and funding their poor choices while believing we were a loving family facing temporary difficulties together. Now I was free to discover who I could become when surrounded by people who supported my success rather than people who profited from my dependence. The legal battle ahead would be difficult, but it would also be the final step in claiming my independence and protecting myself from future manipulation. My grandmother had tried to give me the tools I needed for freedom. Tomorrow I would begin the process of reclaiming them. Uncle Marcus arrived at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport carrying a briefcase and wearing the serious expression of someone who had spent considerable time preparing for an unpleasant conversation. At 48, he looked remarkably similar to my father, but carried himself with the confident posture of someone who had never gambled away his family's financial security. We met for lunch at a quiet restaurant near my apartment where Marcus spread out documents across our table like evidence in a criminal trial. Cindy, before we discuss legal options, I want you to understand exactly what your parents have done. He began pulling out a folder marked Inheritance Documentation. The first document was my grandmother's original will written in careful legal language, but containing a personal note in her handwriting. The note explained her decision to create a trust for me, specifically because she had observed concerning financial patterns in my parents' behavior over many years. Your grandmother was worried about your parents' spending habits long before Bob lost his job, Marcus explained. She documented several incidents where they borrowed money from family members and failed to repay it as promised. He showed me a series of letters my grandmother had written to various family members expressing concern about loans they had made to my parents that had never been repaid. The pattern went back over 15 years, beginning when I was in elementary school. She tried to protect you by creating a trust that your parents could not access until you turned 25 and demonstrated financial independence, Marcus continued. The money was specifically intended to help you establish your career and adult life without their interference. The next document was a petition my parents had filed with the probate court claiming I was emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible, and requesting modification of the trust terms to allow them to manage the inheritance on my behalf. This petition contains multiple false statements, Marcus said, pointing to specific paragraphs. They claimed you had a history of impulsive spending, substance abuse problems, and mental health issues that made you unfit to manage money responsibly. Substance abuse problems. I had never used illegal drugs or had issues with alcohol consumption. The claim was completely fabricated. How did they convince a judge to believe these lies? Marcus pulled out another folder labeled Supporting Documentation. They provided witness statements from Derek Matthews, Mrs. Henderson from your neighborhood, and someone named Dr. Patricia Foster, who claimed to be your therapist. Dr. Patricia Foster. I had never seen a therapist by that name. I had never seen any therapist during college. Dr. Foster doesn't exist, does she? We contacted the state licensing board. No mental health professional by that name is licensed to practice in Ohio. My parents had created a fictional therapist and forged professional documentation to support their petition for control over my inheritance. The fraud was systematic and premeditated. What about Mrs. Henderson? Mrs. Henderson confirmed that your parents asked her to sign a statement, but they told her it was a character reference to help you qualify for student housing. She had no idea it was being used to claim you were mentally unstable. So Derek was the only person who had knowingly participated in the fraud, albeit under false pretenses provided by my parents. Marcus spread out bank statements showing how my inheritance money had been used. They received the $50,000 18 months ago. Within 6 weeks, they had invested the entire amount in cryptocurrency and high-risk stock options. The trading records showed a pattern of increasingly desperate financial decisions. When the initial investments lost money, my parents had doubled down with more aggressive trading strategies. When those failed, they had taken out loans using the remaining inheritance money as collateral. By the time Bob lost his job, they had lost 90% of your inheritance and owed an additional $30,000 in margin debt from their trading activities. I stared at the documentation, trying to comprehend the magnitude of their financial recklessness. They had not just stolen my inheritance, they had used it as seed money for gambling that left them deeper in debt than when they started. There's more, Marcus said grimly. Your parents have been using your social security number and personal information to open credit cards and take out loans without your knowledge. He produced credit reports showing accounts I had never opened, 3 credit cards, 2 personal loans, and a car loan for a vehicle I had never seen. The total debt in my name exceeded $47,000. How is this possible? Identity theft. They've been using your personal information since you turned 18, building credit history in your name, while keeping you unaware of the activity. My credit score had been destroyed by debt I never incurred. My financial reputation was ruined before I had even begun my adult life. The car loan is particularly concerning, Marcus added. The vehicle was registered to your parents' address, but the monthly payments are your legal responsibility. If they default, the lender will pursue you for the balance. A car loan for a vehicle I had never driven purchased with my stolen identity while I rode the bus to campus and work. Marcus, what are my legal options? Criminal charges for identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, and elder fraud related to your grandmother's inheritance. Civil litigation to recover damages and establish that you are not responsible for debts incurred through identity theft. Elder fraud. Your grandmother was 83 when she died. Laws protecting elderly people from financial exploitation apply to fraudulent manipulation of their estates and bequests. Marcus pulled out one final document. There's something else you need to see. Your grandmother left letters specifically for you to be delivered when you turn 25. He handed me a sealed envelope addressed in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it and began reading her final words to me. My dearest Cindy, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means my concerns about your parents' financial behavior were justified, and they attempted to circumvent my wishes regarding your inheritance. She had predicted everything. My grandmother had known my parents would try to access the money intended for my independence, and she had left evidence to help me fight back. I have watched your parents struggle with money management for many years, always finding new ways to avoid taking responsibility for their choices, the letter continued. My greatest fear is that they will use your love and loyalty to subsidize their poor decisions indefinitely. The letter included specific examples of my parents' financial irresponsibility that my grandmother had witnessed, including several occasions when they had borrowed money from her and spent it on luxury items instead of the necessities they had claimed to need. Your inheritance is meant to give you freedom, Cindy. Freedom to pursue your dreams without their interference. Freedom to make your own mistakes and learn from them. And freedom to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. She concluded with advice that felt prophetic given my current situation. If you ever discover that your parents have attempted to access this money against my wishes, do not hesitate to seek legal protection for yourself and your future. Family love should never require you to sacrifice your independence or enable their destructive behavior. I finished reading the letter with tears streaming down my face. My grandmother had understood the dynamics of our family better than I had, and she had tried to protect me from exactly what had transpired. Marcus, I want to pursue criminal charges. Are you certain this will likely destroy any possibility of reconciliation with your parents? The relationship was already destroyed. I just didn't realize it until now. Marcus nodded and pulled out his business card along with contact information for a criminal defense attorney who specialized in financial fraud cases. I'll help you every step of the way. But Cindy, you should know that your parents hired an attorney yesterday. They're claiming that you stole money from them and fled the state to avoid repayment. They're claiming I stole from them. They filed a police report alleging that you took their emergency mortgage money and used it to fund your move to Seattle. My parents were not just defending themselves, they were actively trying to frame me for theft that they had committed. Their willingness to criminalize my legitimate departure demonstrated how far they would go to maintain control over the narrative. What emergency mortgage money? Money they claim you agreed to provide from your signing bonus. They're telling authorities that you took the money under false pretenses and then fled the jurisdiction to avoid accountability. The audacity was breathtaking. After stealing my inheritance and destroying my credit, they were now trying to have me arrested for refusing to subsidize their lifestyle with money I had earned legitimately. Marcus, how quickly can we file charges against them? I'll make the calls this afternoon, but you need to be prepared for this to get ugly very quickly. As we gathered the documents and prepared to leave the restaurant, I realized that my parents had finally shown me who they truly were beneath their facade of concerned family love. They were not misguided people making poor choices. They were calculating individuals willing to destroy their daughter's life to avoid facing consequences for their behavior. The legal battle ahead would be painful and expensive, but it would also be my final step toward complete independence from people who had never viewed me as anything more than a financial opportunity. My grandmother had given me the tools I needed to fight back. Now it was time to use them. While Marcus handled the initial legal filings in Ohio, I focused on beginning my career at Seattle General Hospital. The orientation program was intensive and welcoming, introducing me to colleagues who treated me with professional respect and genuine interest in my success. For the first time in months, I was surrounded by people who valued my competence, rather than viewing me as a source of financial support. On my third day at work, I was organizing patient files when an older woman approached my desk with a hesitant smile. "Excuse me, are you Cindy Patterson?" "Yes, I am." "My name is Mrs. Eleanor Patterson. I live next door to your parents in Ohio." My heart sank. Mrs. Patterson had traveled across the country to confront me, probably to convince me to return home and help my family through their crisis. Mrs. Patterson, if my parents sent you here. Your parents don't know I'm here, she interrupted gently. I came because I have information you need to hear. She looked around the busy nursing station. Is there somewhere private we could talk? I led her to a small consultation room where we could speak without interruption. Mrs. Patterson, I don't understand why you're here. I'm here because I've been documenting your parents' behavior for the past 3 years, and I think you're in danger. Documenting their behavior. Mrs. Patterson had been investigating my parents without their knowledge. What kind of documentation? She opened her purse and pulled out a small recording device. After my husband died 2 years ago, I had trouble sleeping. I started sitting by my kitchen window late at night just watching the neighborhood. Your parents' house is directly across from mine, and I could hear their conversations when they argued on their back porch. You recorded their conversations. I recorded them because what I heard concerned me greatly. They were discussing strategies for manipulating you financially, and some of their plans sounded potentially illegal. Mrs. Patterson had been an undercover witness to my parents' schemes, gathering evidence, while they believed no one was paying attention. What did you hear? She pressed play on the recording device. My father's voice filled the small room, slightly distorted but clearly audible. The inheritance money is almost gone, he was saying. We need to convince Cindy to start contributing her paychecks as soon as she graduates. My mother's voice responded, She's too independent. We should have kept her more financially dependent during college. It's not too late. If we can convince her that we're facing a genuine crisis, she'll feel obligated to help. Family loyalty runs deep with her. What if she refuses? Then we escalate. We have enough information about her personal life to create problems for her professionally if necessary. Mrs. Patterson stopped the recording. This conversation took place 6 months ago, long before your father lost his job. They had been planning to manipulate me into financial support since before their current crisis began. The mortgage problems and debt accumulation were real, but their expectation of my subsidizing their lifestyle was premeditated. There's more. Mrs. Patterson continued, advancing to another section of the recording. This time my mother's voice was clearer. Derek Matthews is perfect for this. He's always had a crush on Cindy, and he trusts us to know what's best for her. You think he'll sign the inheritance paperwork? If we frame it as protecting her from making bad decisions, absolutely. Derek sees himself as her white knight. They had specifically targeted Derek's romantic interest in me to recruit him as a participant in their fraud. His genuine desire to protect me had been weaponized against my financial interests. Mrs. Patterson showed me dates and timestamps for dozens of recordings spanning 3 years. I started paying attention after I noticed some concerning patterns in their behavior toward you. What patterns? They would brag about your achievements to neighbors when they needed to borrow money, but they would criticize your judgment and maturity when discussing your future plans. It seemed manipulative. She had recognized the contradiction that I had missed my parents promoted my successes when doing so benefited them financially, but undermined my independence when I showed signs of making autonomous decisions. Mrs. Patterson, why didn't you tell me about this earlier? I tried to protect you in small ways without interfering directly, but when you moved to Seattle and they started telling people you had stolen money from them, I realized the situation was escalating beyond anything I could handle quietly. They're telling people I stole money. They're claiming you took emergency funds they had set aside for the mortgage and used that money to relocate to Seattle. They've been asking neighbors for financial help while portraying you as an ungrateful daughter who abandoned them during their greatest need. My parents were not just defending themselves against my allegations. They were actively destroying my reputation throughout our neighborhood to generate sympathy and financial support from people who believed their version of events. Mrs. Patterson handed me a business card. I also brought someone with me who can help you understand your legal options. Before I could ask what she meant, there was a knock on the consultation room door. A middle-aged woman in a professional suit entered and introduced herself. Cindy, I'm Amanda Torres, director of the Northwest Family Financial Abuse Recovery Center. Mrs. Patterson contacted our organization after researching resources for adult children of financially abusive parents. Amanda Torres specialized in exactly the situation I was facing. Her organization provided legal support counseling services and practical assistance for adults whose family members were exploiting them financially. Mrs. Patterson's recordings provide compelling evidence of premeditated financial manipulation, Amanda continued. We've seen similar patterns in dozens of cases, and we know how to help you protect yourself and recover damages. There are other people dealing with this. Financial abuse by family members is far more common than most people realize. Parents who view their adult children as sources of income rather than independent individuals. We've helped clients recover hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen inheritance money, fraudulent debts, and identity theft damages. Amanda explained the legal process for financial abuse cases and the resources available through her organization. They would provide legal representation coordinate with law enforcement agencies and offer counseling support throughout the recovery process. The most important thing is that you're physically safe and financially independent while we pursue legal remedies, she said. Your parents may escalate their behavior when they realize you have legal representation and documentation of their fraud. Mrs. Patterson nodded. They've already been calling relatives claiming that Cindy has had a mental breakdown and is being manipulated by people in Seattle who don't understand the family situation. They're trying to recruit family members to intervene. Your Uncle Marcus has been fielding calls all week. Some relatives are buying their story and pressuring him to convince you to come home. My parents were mobilizing extended family to pressure me into returning using the same false narratives about my mental state that they had used to steal my inheritance. Amanda, what should I do if family members start contacting me? Refer them to your attorney and don't engage with their attempts at manipulation. People who genuinely care about you will support your right to make independent decisions. People who pressure you to subsidize your parents' lifestyle are not acting in your best interests. Mrs. Patterson handed me copies of all her recordings, along with detailed notes about conversations she had witnessed. I also documented their spending patterns. New cars, expensive electronics, luxury vacations, all purchased while they were claiming financial hardship and asking for money from neighbors. You documented their purchases. I photographed delivery trucks, recorded conversations about vacation plans, and noted discrepancies between their claims of poverty and their actual lifestyle. Everything is organized chronologically with dates and descriptions. Mrs. Patterson had been conducting a thorough investigation of my parents' behavior, gathering evidence that would support criminal and civil charges for fraud, identity theft, and financial abuse. Why did you do all this work? I asked. Because I recognized the signs of financial abuse from my own experience, she said quietly. My late husband's family tried to manipulate us financially for years. I learned to document everything and protect myself from their schemes. She had recognized my parents' behavior because she had survived similar manipulation herself. Her investigation had been motivated by personal understanding of financial abuse dynamics rather than mere neighborly concern. Amanda Torres outlined the next steps in the legal process and provided contact information for attorneys in Ohio who specialized in financial crimes. Mrs. Patterson's evidence combined with your uncle's documentation of the inheritance theft gives you an exceptionally strong case. What should I expect from my parents as this progresses? Escalation, Amanda said bluntly. They'll try to convince everyone that you're unstable, ungrateful, and manipulated by outsiders. They may threaten your professional reputation or attempt to sabotage your career. Some financially abusive parents even hire private investigators or file false police reports. The battle was just beginning, but I finally had allies who understood the situation and resources to fight back effectively. Mrs. Patterson's evidence would corroborate Uncle Marcus's documentation, creating a comprehensive record of my parents' systematic fraud and manipulation. As we concluded our meeting, Mrs. Patterson handed me one final item, a letter addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting. I found this tucked behind some books when I was helping clean out her house after the funeral. I think she meant for you to have it, but your parents must have overlooked it. The letter was brief but powerful. Cindy, if anything ever happens to me, know that I have taken steps to protect your future from people who would exploit your kindness and success. Trust your instincts, seek help from people outside the family, and never sacrifice your independence to enable someone else's irresponsibility. My grandmother had left me a network of protection that extended beyond financial resources. Mrs. Patterson, Uncle Marcus, Amanda Torres, and the legal professionals they had connected me with formed a support system designed to help me reclaim my independence and hold my parents accountable for their crimes. The fight ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer facing it alone. Armed with Mrs. Patterson's recordings and Uncle Marcus's documentation, I contacted Detective Lisa Morgan at the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit the following Monday. Detective Morgan had over 15 years of experience investigating identity theft and family financial abuse cases, and her direct approach immediately put me at ease. Ms. Patterson, the evidence you've provided is exceptionally comprehensive, she said after reviewing the materials. Identity theft cases involving family members are often difficult to prosecute because victims lack documentation, but you have recordings, bank statements, forged court documents, and witness testimony. We sat in her office at the downtown precinct while she organized the evidence into distinct categories: identity theft, inheritance fraud, mail fraud, and financial elder abuse. Each category represented separate criminal charges that could be filed against my parents. Detective Morgan, what happens next? I'll coordinate with law enforcement in Ohio to execute search warrants and make arrests. Given the interstate nature of the fraud and the involvement of federal mail systems, this case will likely be handled jointly between local and federal authorities. Federal involvement. The scope of my parents' crimes had attracted the attention of agencies beyond local police departments. How long does this process typically take? Criminal investigations can take several months, but we have enough evidence to make immediate arrests. The civil recovery process for your inheritance and identity theft damages will take longer. Detective Morgan explained that criminal prosecution would proceed independently of civil litigation. My parents could face jail time for their crimes while also being required to pay restitution for financial damages. What should I expect from your parents when they're arrested? Denial, blame shifting, and attempts to portray themselves as victims of misunderstanding. Family financial abuse cases often involve perpetrators who genuinely believe their behavior was justified. 2 days later, Detective Morgan called with an update. Your parents were arrested this morning at their home in Columbus. They've been charged with identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, and elder abuse related to your grandmother's inheritance. My parents were in jail. The people who had raised me were sitting in holding cells facing felony charges for crimes they had committed against me and my grandmother's estate. How did they react to the arrests? Your father became aggressive and claimed this was all a misunderstanding, orchestrated by ungrateful family members. Your mother broke down crying and insisted they were only trying to help you make responsible financial decisions. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, my parents maintained their narrative that stealing from me had been an act of parental protection. Detective Morgan, there's something else you should know. My parents filed false police reports claiming I stole money from them. Those charges have been dismissed. The evidence clearly shows that no theft occurred on your part, and filing false reports is a separate crime we'll be adding to their charges. Within 24 hours of their arrest, local news outlets picked up the story. The combination of inheritance theft, identity fraud, and a college graduate fleeing across the country created compelling human interest content that resonated with viewers. Family financial fraud case highlights growing problem. Read the headline in the Columbus Dispatch. The article described my situation without using my name, but included quotes from Amanda Torres about the prevalence of financial abuse by family members. We see cases like this regularly, Amanda was quoted saying. Adult children who discover their parents have been systematically stealing from them while creating false narratives about the victim's character and mental health. The media coverage attracted attention from other families dealing with similar situations. I received dozens of messages through the Financial Abuse Recovery Center from people whose parents had committed comparable crimes. One message particularly moved me. Reading about your case helped me understand that my mother's behavior toward my inheritance wasn't normal family financial management, it was criminal fraud. Thank you for being brave enough to speak publicly about this. I was not the only person whose family had betrayed their trust for financial gain. The response to news coverage revealed that financial abuse by parents was a widespread problem that most victims suffered through in silence. Detective Morgan contacted me with another development. Your case has generated additional complaints about your parents' financial behavior. 3 neighbors have come forward with evidence that your parents solicited money under false pretenses. What kind of evidence? Written requests for loans, supposedly for your medical expenses, your educational costs, and family emergencies. The neighbors kept copies of the letters and checks, and they're willing to testify that your parents misrepresented how the money would be used. Mrs. Henderson. Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Williams from our street had all been victims of my parents' fundraising schemes. They had donated money believing they were helping me, only to discover that my parents had used the funds for personal expenses while I remained unaware of the donations. How much money did they collect from neighbors? Over $12,000 during the past 3 years, all solicited through letters claiming various family crises that required immediate financial assistance. $12,000 stolen from well-meaning neighbors who had trusted my parents' claims about family emergencies. Money that could have significantly reduced their legitimate debt if they had used it responsibly instead of treating it as supplemental income for lifestyle maintenance. The prosecutor's office contacted Uncle Marcus to discuss the federal charges related to mail fraud and interstate financial crimes. Because my parents had used postal services to commit fraud and the crimes involved victims in multiple states, federal prosecutors were considering additional charges beyond what local authorities had filed. Federal charges carry much more serious penalties, Uncle Marcus explained during one of our daily phone calls. Your parents could face 5 to 10 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. 5 to 10 years. The consequences of their financial crimes were severe enough to result in lengthy prison sentences that would fundamentally alter their lives. Marcus, do you think they understand the seriousness of their situation? Based on the phone calls I've been receiving from other family members, no. They're still telling people this is all a misunderstanding caused by your emotional instability and manipulation by people in Seattle. Even facing felony charges and potential imprisonment, my parents maintained their false narrative about my mental health and their own victimhood. What are other family members saying? It's split. About half the family believes your parents' version of events. The other half is asking questions and starting to remember suspicious behavior they had previously overlooked. My cousin Sarah called me directly after seeing the news coverage. Cindy, I owe you an apology. Your parents asked us for money last year, claiming you were having psychological problems and needed expensive therapy. We sent them $800. They told you I was in therapy. They said you were struggling with depression and anxiety related to school stress, and that you were too proud to accept help directly. They asked us to send money for your treatment. Another fabricated crisis designed to generate financial support from family members who cared about my welfare. My parents had created an entire fictional narrative about my mental health problems to justify constant fundraising efforts. Sarah, I was never in therapy. I've never had psychological problems related to school. I'm starting to realize that. Looking back, there were a lot of inconsistencies in the stories they told us about your situation. As more family members learned the truth about my parents' behavior, a clearer picture emerged of their systematic deception spanning many years. They had not simply made poor financial decisions during a difficult period, they had operated a sophisticated scheme to extract money from anyone who cared about me or felt sympathy for their supposed family crises. The bank handling their foreclosure proceedings also became involved in the criminal investigation. When mortgage investigators reviewed my parents' financial history, they discovered that loan applications had included false information about their income, employment status, and assets. Your parents committed mortgage fraud when they refinanced their house 2 years ago, Detective Morgan informed me. They inflated their income figures and failed to disclose existing debt obligations. Mortgage fraud added another layer of criminal charges and helped explain how my parents had accumulated so much debt so quickly. They had been lying to financial institutions while simultaneously stealing from family members and neighbors. The house that they had been so desperate to save through my financial support had been purchased and refinanced through fraudulent documentation. Even if I had agreed to their demands for money, I would have been subsidizing their continued criminal behavior rather than helping them through a temporary crisis. Detective, when will this case go to trial? Probably within 6 to 12 months. The prosecutor wants to build the strongest possible case because financial abuse crimes are often underreported and underprosecuted. Your case could set important precedents for how these situations are handled. My personal story was becoming a public case study in family financial abuse, helping to establish legal precedents that could protect other victims from similar exploitation. But the most important outcome was that my parents finally faced real consequences for their crimes, instead of simply moving on to new victims when their current schemes failed. The justice system was holding them accountable for behavior they had never been forced to examine honestly. As I prepared for months of legal proceedings, I felt a strange combination of sadness and relief. Sadness for the family relationship I had lost, but relief that I would never again be manipulated into subsidizing their irresponsible behavior. The legal battle was just beginning, but I already felt free. While criminal proceedings moved forward in Ohio, my professional life in Seattle flourished in ways I had never anticipated. The emergency department at Seattle General provided exactly the challenging, fast-paced environment I had hoped to find in nursing, and my colleagues treated me with respect and genuine interest in my development. 3 weeks into my employment, Jennifer Hughes, the nurse recruiter who had hired me, approached me during a break between shifts. "Cindy, I've been following the news coverage of your family's situation, and I wanted to discuss something with you." My heart sank. I had hoped my personal legal issues would not affect my professional reputation, but apparently the media coverage had reached my new workplace. "I understand if this creates problems for my employment," I said carefully. "Actually, it's quite the opposite. Your experience with family financial abuse has highlighted an issue we encounter regularly in healthcare, but don't address systematically." Jennifer explained that emergency departments frequently treated patients whose medical problems stemmed from financial stress caused by family exploitation. Elderly patients brought in by family members who were stealing their Social Security benefits. Young adults with anxiety and depression related to family financial manipulation. Parents who couldn't afford medication because their adult children were draining their savings. We see the medical consequences of financial abuse, but we don't have protocols for identifying it or connecting victims with appropriate resources, she continued. "What are you proposing?" "I'd like to offer you a specialized position developing financial abuse recognition and intervention protocols for our hospital system. You would work half-time in the emergency department, maintaining your clinical skills, and half-time creating educational programs and support systems for patients experiencing family financial exploitation. A specialized position focused on helping people in situations similar to what I had experienced. The opportunity to turn my personal trauma into professional expertise that could benefit others facing comparable challenges. This would be a newly created role. Yes, hospital administration has been looking for ways to address the social determinants of health that affect our patient population. Your background gives you unique insight into how family financial abuse impacts health outcomes. The position offered a significant salary increase opportunities for professional development and the chance to work on issues I was passionate about. More importantly, it would allow me to help other people recognize and escape financial manipulation by family members. I'm very interested. Jennifer introduced me to Dr. Patricia Chen, the hospital's chief medical officer, who outlined the scope of the financial abuse intervention program they wanted me to develop. Research shows that family financial abuse affects approximately 10% of adults at some point in their lives, Dr. Chen explained. But healthcare workers rarely receive training to recognize the signs or provide appropriate referrals. What would my responsibilities include? Developing screening protocols, training healthcare staff, creating resource directories for victims, and establishing partnerships with legal and social service organizations, essentially building a comprehensive response system within our hospital network. The program would serve patients throughout the greater Seattle area, potentially helping thousands of people identify and address financial abuse by family members. My personal experience would inform professional protocols that could save other people years of exploitation and manipulation. Dr. Chen, how quickly would you need me to start this new role? Immediately. We've already received inquiries from other hospitals interested in implementing similar programs. There's significant interest in replicating whatever system we develop here. Within a week, I transitioned into my new position as Director of Financial Abuse Patient Advocacy. The title felt surreal given that I was still dealing with ongoing criminal prosecution of my own family members, but it also felt like a natural evolution of my experience. My first project involved developing a screening questionnaire that emergency department staff could use to identify patients whose medical problems might be related to family financial stress. Questions about housing stability, ability to afford medications, and family financial relationships that seemed unusually controlling or manipulative. Have family members ever used your personal information to open credit accounts without your permission? Was one question that I knew from experience was crucial, but rarely asked in medical settings. I also created educational materials explaining the difference between normal family financial assistance and exploitative financial abuse. Many victims like I had been failed to recognize manipulation because it was presented as temporary help during family crises. Financial abuse often begins with small requests that gradually escalate into systematic exploitation, I wrote in the training manual. Victims may not realize they're being manipulated until they've lost significant money or opportunities. The hospital's legal department connected me with attorneys throughout Washington state who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse. Together, we developed referral protocols that would allow healthcare workers to connect patients with appropriate legal resources without overstepping professional boundaries. Amanda Torres from the Financial Abuse Recovery Center became a regular collaborator, helping me understand best practices for supporting victims while they navigated legal and emotional recovery processes. The key is validation, she explained during one of our planning meetings. Most financial abuse victims have been told they're crazy, ungrateful, or misunderstanding normal family behavior. Healthcare workers can provide crucial reality checking by confirming that financial manipulation is never acceptable. My blog documenting my recovery process gained significant readership as people shared their own stories of family financial exploitation. Comments revealed the widespread nature of financial abuse and the isolation experienced by victims who believed their situations were unique. I thought I was the only person whose mother had stolen my student loan money, wrote one reader. Reading your story helped me realize this is actually criminal behavior, not just family dysfunction. The blog became a resource for people questioning whether their family's financial behavior crossed the line from poor judgment into criminal manipulation. I provided information about legal protections, documentation strategies, and emotional support resources. 6 months into my new role, Seattle General Hospital's Financial Abuse Intervention Program was being studied by healthcare systems throughout the country. We had identified over 300 patients experiencing some form of family financial exploitation and connected them with legal and social service resources. This program is saving lives, Dr. Chen told me during my 6-month review. We've had patients whose medical conditions improved dramatically once they addressed underlying financial stress caused by family abuse. One patient particularly stood out: Margaret Foster, a 74-year-old woman whose adult son had been stealing her prescription medication to sell for drug money. She had been coming to the emergency department repeatedly with uncontrolled diabetes because she could not afford to refill medications that her son kept taking. No one had ever asked me directly about my family's access to my medications, Margaret told me during a follow-up visit. I was too ashamed to volunteer that information, but when you asked the screening questions, I realized I wasn't protecting my son by enabling his theft. Margaret's son was now in drug treatment. She had secured her medications, and her diabetes was under control for the first time in 2 years. Her case demonstrated how family financial abuse often intersected with other forms of exploitation and health problems. The success of the program attracted attention from state legislators interested in strengthening protections for financial abuse victims. I was invited to testify before the Washington State Senate about the prevalence of family financial exploitation and the need for improved legal remedies. Healthcare workers are often the first professionals to identify family financial abuse, I told the legislative committee. But we need better tools and training to recognize the signs and provide effective interventions. My testimony contributed to legislation requiring healthcare workers to receive training in financial abuse recognition and mandating reporting protocols similar to those used for other forms of family violence. The professional recognition was gratifying, but the most meaningful aspect of my work was directly helping people escape situations similar to what I had experienced. Each victim who gained the courage to seek legal protection validated my decision to speak publicly about my parents' crimes. "Cindy, your advocacy work has already helped more people than you realize," Amanda Torres told me during one of our regular meetings. "But I think you're just getting started." She was right. The Financial Abuse Intervention Program at Seattle General was expanding to include partnerships with law enforcement, legal aid organizations, and social service agencies throughout the Pacific Northwest. We were building a comprehensive support network for victims that hadn't existed when I needed help. My personal trauma was becoming professional expertise that benefited thousands of people facing similar exploitation. The career I had built was more meaningful and impactful than anything I had imagined when I first applied to nursing school. But the most important outcome was that I had found my calling in work that felt genuinely important. Helping people escape financial manipulation by family members gave my experience purpose and meaning beyond personal recovery. Every victim we identified and connected with resources represented someone who would not suffer through years of exploitation in silence like I had. Every healthcare worker we trained became more effective at recognizing and addressing financial abuse in their patient population. The one-way ticket to Seattle had led not just to safety and independence, but to a career dedicated to protecting other people from the crimes my parents had committed against me. 18 months after my parents' arrest, their criminal trial began in Franklin County Common Pleas Court in Columbus. I flew back to Ohio to testify, accompanied by Amanda Torres and my attorney David Richardson, who had been handling the civil aspects of my case. The courthouse was smaller than I had expected, but the gravity of the proceedings felt overwhelming as I sat in the witness area, waiting to be called. My parents sat at the defendant's table with their attorney, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. Janet had lost weight and Bob's hair had gone completely gray during his time in jail awaiting trial. The prosecutor assistant district attorney Michelle Davis had built a comprehensive case around the evidence Uncle Marcus, Mrs. Patterson, and I had provided. The charges included identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, elder abuse, and filing false police reports. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began during opening statements, "this case is about systematic financial exploitation of a daughter by her parents and the theft of inheritance money specifically intended to protect that daughter from exactly this type of manipulation." She outlined the scope of my parents' crime, stealing $50,000 from my grandmother's estate, accumulating over $40,000 in debt, using my identity, soliciting money from neighbors under false pretenses, and attempting to sabotage my career opportunities to maintain financial control over me. The defendants didn't just commit financial crimes, Ada Davis continued. They created false narratives about their daughter's mental health to justify their theft and manipulation, damaging her reputation throughout their community. The defense attorney Michael Thompson attempted to portray my parents as loving family members who had made poor financial decisions during a difficult period but never intended to harm me. Bob and Janet Patterson are not criminals, he argued. They are parents who made mistakes while trying to protect their daughter from financial irresponsibility and poor decision-making. The same narrative my parents had been using throughout this ordeal, they had committed crimes to protect me from myself. When I was called to testify, I walked to the witness stand feeling nervous but determined to tell the truth about what had happened. Ada Davis led me through a chronological account of discovering the hidden scholarships, the stolen inheritance money, the identity theft, and the lies my parents had told about my character. Ms. Patterson, did you ever give your parents permission to use your Social Security number to open credit accounts? No, I did not. Did you ever ask them to contact potential employers and claim you were mentally unstable? No. I was not aware they had contacted employers until Dr. Williams informed me that hospitals had called with concerns about my psychological fitness. How did you feel when you discovered that your parents had hidden full scholarship offers from prestigious universities? Betrayed. Those scholarships would have changed my entire educational path and financial future. Hiding them from me took away opportunities I can never recover. The defense attorney's cross-examination focused on portraying me as an ungrateful daughter who was exaggerating normal family financial struggles to avoid helping my parents during a crisis. Ms. Patterson, isn't it true that your parents supported you throughout college by allowing you to live at home, rent-free? They allowed me to live at home while I worked 20 hours per week and took out student loans to pay for my education. But they also collected money from relatives supposedly for my education and used it for their own expenses. But they provided a stable home environment for your studies. They provided a home environment where they intercepted my mail, sabotaged my career opportunities, and stole money intended for my education. The defense attorney attempted to portray my move to Seattle as evidence of impulsive decision-making that validated my parents' concerns about my maturity. Didn't you leave for Seattle without warning, abandoning your family during their financial crisis? I left for Seattle after discovering evidence that my parents had been systematically defrauding me and stealing from my grandmother's estate. I moved to protect myself from further financial exploitation. Uncle Marcus testified about the inheritance fraud, presenting copies of my grandmother's original will and the forged documents my parents had used to gain control over the trust money. His testimony was particularly damaging because he could explain the legal requirements for trust modifications and how my parents had circumvented them through perjury. The trust was specifically designed to protect Cindy from financial manipulation by her parents, he testified. My mother was concerned about Bob and Janet's financial management and wanted to ensure Cindy would have resources they could not access. Mrs. Patterson's recordings provided the most compelling evidence of premeditated financial manipulation. The jury listened to my parents planning to manipulate me into providing financial support long before their mortgage crisis began. When the recordings played, I watched the jurors' faces and saw the moment they understood the calculated nature of my parents' behavior. These were not desperate people making poor choices during a crisis. These were individuals systematically planning to exploit their daughter's sense of family obligation. Derek Matthews testified about signing the inheritance paperwork, explaining how my parents had convinced him that helping them gain control over my grandmother's bequest was in my best interests. They told me Cindy was too young to handle $50,000 responsibly, he said. They convinced me that protecting the money until she was more mature was the right thing to do. Did they tell you they intended to use the inheritance money for cryptocurrency investments? Ada Davis asked. No, they said they would put it in conservative investments until Cindy was ready to receive it. The neighbors who had given my parents money also testified about the false fundraising letters they had received. Mrs. Henderson explained how my parents had solicited donations for my supposed medical expenses while I was completely healthy and unaware of their fundraising efforts. They said Cindy was too proud to accept help directly, so they asked us to send money for her therapy and medical bills, she testified. We thought we were helping a young woman who was struggling with health problems. As the prosecution presented evidence of my parents' crimes, a clear pattern emerged of systematic deception spanning many years. They had not simply made poor financial choices, they had operated sophisticated schemes to extract money from anyone who cared about me or felt sympathy for fabricated family crises. During her testimony, Janet broke down crying and claimed that everything she had done was motivated by love and concern for my welfare. I was trying to protect Cindy from making mistakes that would hurt her future, she sobbed. Everything we did was because we love her. But Bob's testimony revealed a different motivation. When questioned about using my identity to open credit accounts, he became defensive and argumentative. Cindy is our daughter, he said angrily. Parents have the right to make financial decisions for their children when necessary. Mr. Patterson, your daughter, was 22 years old when you opened credit cards in her name without permission. She was a legal adult. Age doesn't determine maturity. She needed guidance, and we provided it. Bob's testimony damaged their defense because it revealed his genuine belief that he had the right to control my financial life indefinitely. He showed no remorse for the crimes he had committed, only anger that his authority as a parent was being questioned. The trial lasted 8 days with testimony from 12 witnesses and presentation of hundreds of pages of financial documentation. The evidence was overwhelming, but I remained nervous about the jury's verdict until they returned to the courtroom after 3 hours of deliberation. We, the jury, find the defendant Robert Patterson guilty on all counts. We, the jury, find the defendant Janet Patterson guilty on all counts. Relief flooded through me as I heard the verdicts. My parents had been held accountable for their crimes by a jury of their peers who had seen through their justifications and recognized their behavior as criminal fraud. During sentencing 2 weeks later, both parents had opportunities to address the court. Janet offered a tearful apology that seemed genuine, but continued to minimize the scope of her crimes. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused Cindy," she said. "I never intended to hurt her, and I hope someday she can forgive me." Bob's statement was defiant and unrepentant. "I did what I thought was best for my family," he told the judge. "I don't apologize for trying to protect my daughter from making financial mistakes." Judge Helen Rodriguez sentenced Bob to 30 months in state prison and Janet to 18 months, along with restitution payments totaling $93,000. The sentences reflected the serious nature of their crimes, while acknowledging Janet's apparent remorse compared to Bob's continued defiance. Financial abuse within families causes profound psychological damage beyond the monetary losses, Judge Rodriguez said during sentencing. The defendants violated the most basic trust that should exist between parents and children. As I left the courthouse, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but it came at the cost of any possibility of normal family relationships in the future. My parents would spend the next 2 years in prison, and their criminal convictions would follow them for the rest of their lives. But I also felt liberated from years of manipulation and gaslighting. The legal system had validated my perspective and confirmed that my parents' behavior was criminal rather than simply misguided parenting. I was free to build my life without their interference or financial exploitation. The trial had been painful but necessary to protect myself and establish precedents for other victims of family financial abuse. My willingness to testify publicly had contributed to legal outcomes that would make it easier for future victims to seek justice. Most importantly, I had proven to myself that I could survive my family's betrayal and build something meaningful from the trauma they had caused. The career I had built helping other financial abuse victims gave purpose to the pain I had experienced. As I flew back to Seattle, I felt ready to close this chapter of my life and focus on the future I was creating for myself. 5 years after my parents' conviction, I sat in a conference room at the Washington State Capitol, preparing to testify before a joint legislative committee about proposed changes to financial abuse laws. My work at Seattle General Hospital had evolved into a statewide advocacy role, and the protocols we had developed were being implemented in healthcare systems across the country. Ms. Patterson, can you explain how your legislation would strengthen protections for adult victims of family financial abuse? Asked Senator Maria Rodriguez, who chaired the committee. The proposed bill would establish mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions when they identify suspicious account activity suggesting family financial abuse, I explained. It would also create specialized courts for financial abuse cases and provide funding for victim services. The legislation represented 5 years of work with legal experts, victim advocates, and law enforcement agencies. We had identified gaps in existing laws that allowed family financial abuse to continue undetected and unprosecuted, and we had developed comprehensive solutions to address those problems. How common is family financial abuse in your experience? Our research indicates that approximately 12% of adults experience some form of financial exploitation by family members during their lifetime. But prosecution rates remain very low because victims often don't recognize the behavior as criminal or they're afraid to report family members to authorities. I had become the public face of family financial abuse advocacy, speaking at conferences, training law enforcement agencies, and working with legislators to strengthen legal protections for victims. My personal story provided credibility and emotional impact that helped policymakers understand the urgency of addressing these crimes. The nonprofit organization I had founded, the Family Financial Safety Foundation, operated programs in 12 states and had helped over 8,000 victims recover from financial exploitation. We provided legal referrals, support groups, and educational resources for people escaping financial manipulation by family members. The Foundation's annual report shows remarkable success rates, Senator Rodriguez noted. 73% of clients successfully recovered stolen funds or established financial independence from abusive family members. Those outcomes reflect the comprehensive support model we've developed, I replied. Victims need legal assistance, emotional support, and practical help rebuilding their financial lives. Addressing only one aspect of the problem isn't sufficient. My book about recovering from family financial abuse. Breaking Free: A Daughter's Journey from Financial Manipulation to Independence had become a bestseller and was being translated into 6 languages. The book combined personal narrative with practical guidance for recognizing and escaping family financial abuse. Reading your story helped me understand that my mother's behavior wasn't normal family financial management, it was criminal fraud, one reader had written. Your book gave me the courage to seek legal help and protect myself. The book's success had led to speaking engagements at universities, conferences, and corporate events. I had testified before Congress about the need for federal legislation addressing family financial abuse, and my recommendations had been incorporated into banking regulations designed to identify suspicious account activity. But the most meaningful aspect of my work remained the direct service to individual victims through the Foundation's support programs. Every week brought new clients who had discovered that family members were stealing their identity, intercepting their mail, or manipulating them into providing financial support for fabricated crises. My parents took out student loans in my name and spent the money on a vacation, one client had told me during her intake interview. They told me I was responsible for the debt because I had benefited from living in their house during college. Another client discovered that his elderly parents had been forging his signature on checks and draining his savings account to fund gambling addiction. I thought I was helping them through a temporary financial problem, but they were stealing from me while creating new debt in my name. The stories varied in detail but followed consistent patterns of manipulation, deception, and financial exploitation, disguised as family assistance or parental protection. My parents' crimes had been sophisticated, but they were not unique. Dr. Chen at Seattle General Hospital had promoted me to Vice President of Community Health Initiatives, overseeing programs that address social determinants of health throughout our hospital system. The financial abuse intervention protocols we had developed were now standard practice in over 200 hospitals nationwide. Cindy's work has fundamentally changed how healthcare providers identify and respond to family financial abuse, Dr. Chen said during a national conference presentation. We've documented significant improvements in patient outcomes when underlying financial exploitation is addressed. My personal recovery had also flourished during these years. I had met Marcus Thompson, a social worker who specialized in trauma recovery, at a conference on family violence prevention. Our relationship developed slowly and carefully, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to helping vulnerable populations. You've created something beautiful from a terrible experience, Marcus told me as we walked along the Seattle waterfront after our engagement dinner. Your parents tried to destroy your independence, but you've used that experience to help thousands of other people claim theirs. Marcus understood my work because he had witnessed similar trauma in his clinical practice. He supported my advocacy efforts while also encouraging me to maintain boundaries between my personal healing and my professional mission. We had purchased a home in a quiet Seattle neighborhood far from the dysfunction and manipulation that had characterized my childhood. The house represented stability and independence that my parents had tried to prevent me from achieving. Uncle Marcus remained a close ally and advisor, serving on the foundation's board of directors and helping other family members understand the reality of what my parents had done. He had recovered significant portions of my stolen inheritance through civil litigation money that had provided seed funding for the foundation's early programs. Your grandmother would be proud of what you've built, he told me during a recent visit. She wanted that inheritance to give you independence, and you've used it to help thousands of other people achieve the same freedom. My parents had been released from prison after serving their full sentences, but they had made no effort to contact me or acknowledge the damage they had caused. According to Uncle Marcus, they continued to blame me for their legal problems and maintained that they had been loving parents whose actions had been misunderstood. They tell people that you were manipulated by lawyers and victim advocates into filing false charges against them, he reported. They still don't accept responsibility for what they did. Their lack of remorse had initially been painful, but I had eventually accepted that genuine accountability was unlikely. My healing had not depended on their acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and my success had not required their approval or understanding. The most profound change in my life was the family I had chosen rather than the family I had been born into. Marcus, Uncle Marcus, Mrs. Patterson, Amanda Torres, and dozens of colleagues and clients had become my real family people, who supported my growth and independence rather than exploiting my achievements for their benefit. During the legislative hearing, I concluded my testimony with a reflection on the broader implications of addressing family financial abuse. These crimes don't just harm individual victims, I told the committee. They undermine trust within families and communities, and they prevent victims from contributing their full potential to society. When we protect people from financial exploitation by family members, we're investing in their ability to build productive, independent lives. The legislation passed unanimously and was signed into law 3 months later. Washington became the 8th state to adopt comprehensive legal protections based on recommendations from the Family Financial Safety Foundation. As I drove home from the Capitol that evening, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since the day I walked across my graduation stage alone. The one-way ticket to Seattle had led not just to escape, but to a career dedicated to protecting other people from the crimes my parents had committed. My personal trauma had become professional expertise that benefited thousands of people facing similar exploitation. The inheritance my grandmother had left to protect my independence had been transformed into resources that helped other victims achieve their own freedom. I had discovered that sometimes the greatest gift you can give to other people is the courage to tell your story honestly, even when it's painful and complicated. My willingness to speak publicly about family financial abuse had helped countless others recognize that they deserved better treatment from the people who claimed to love them. The life I had built was more meaningful and impactful than anything I had imagined during those dark days when I discovered the full scope of my parents' betrayal. I had learned that healing from trauma often involves transforming your pain into purpose, that benefits other people. Tomorrow I would return to work helping new clients escape financial manipulation by family members, knowing that each person we assisted represented someone who would not suffer in silence like I had. Each victim who gained the courage to seek legal protection validated my decision to fight back against my parents' crimes. The foundation I had built from the ashes of my family's betrayal would continue growing long after my personal story faded from public attention. That was the real measure of success, creating systems that protected vulnerable people regardless of who was operating them. 3 years after their release from prison, I received an unexpected package at my office at the Family Financial Safety Foundation. The return address showed a rehabilitation center in Dayton, Ohio, about an hour from my childhood home. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother, the first communication I had received from either parent since their arrest. Dear Cindy, the letter began, I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what we did to you, and I am deeply, deeply sorry. I sat in my office staring at the letter, unsure whether to continue reading or throw it away immediately. After 7 years of silence, Janet was attempting to make contact, and her opening words suggested a level of accountability I had never heard from her before. I'm writing this from a residential treatment program where I have been living for the past 8 months, the letter continued. After your father and I were released from prison, our marriage fell apart completely. We lost the house, and I ended up homeless for a while before entering this program for people with gambling and financial addiction. Gambling addiction. This was the first time either parent had acknowledged that their financial problems stemmed from compulsive behavior rather than temporary setbacks or poor judgment. The counselors here have helped me understand that what we did to you was not parenting, it was financial abuse. We stole from you, lied about you, and tried to control your life for our benefit, not yours. There is no excuse for our behavior, and I don't expect forgiveness. I found myself crying as I read her words, not from joy at her apparent insight, but from grief for all the years we had lost to manipulation and deceit. This letter represented the mother I had needed during my childhood, someone capable of honest self-reflection and genuine accountability. I want you to know that I follow your work through news articles and your foundation's website, she wrote. I am proud of what you have built, and I am ashamed that you had to build it because of what we did to you. You have helped thousands of people escape situations like the one we trapped you in. The acknowledgement of my professional success felt different coming from someone who finally understood the damage that had necessitated my career path. Janet recognized that my advocacy work existed because of trauma they had caused, not despite their parenting efforts. Your father refuses to participate in therapy or acknowledge that our behavior was wrong, the letter concluded. He still blames you, the lawyers, and the system for our legal problems. I cannot change his mind, but I can change my own understanding of what we did. She had included her counselor's contact information and offered to participate in any kind of mediated conversation if I ever wanted to explore reconciliation. She had also enclosed documentation showing that she was attending Gamblers Anonymous and had been sober from financial gambling for over a year. I set the letter aside and tried to focus on my work, but my concentration was scattered throughout the day. Part of me had always hoped my parents would eventually understand and acknowledge their crimes, but I had also built my life around the assumption that such understanding would never come. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived, this one from my father. His tone was completely different from Janet's reflective accountability. Cindy Bob's letter began, I am writing because your mother insists that I owe you an apology, and frankly, I am tired of arguing with her about it. The opening lines immediately revealed that Bob had not experienced the same kind of insight that Janet described in her letter. He was contacting me to satisfy someone else's expectations, not because of personal understanding or remorse. I admit that some of our financial decisions were poor, and maybe we should have discussed them with you before making them, he continued. But everything we did was motivated by concern for your welfare and our family's stability. poor financial decisions. After 7 years criminal conviction and imprisonment, Bob still characterized identity theft, inheritance fraud, and systematic financial manipulation as mere financial planning errors. Your mother has been brainwashed by the counselors at her treatment facility into believing we committed serious crimes against you. His letter continued, but any reasonable person can see that we were trying to protect you from making mistakes that would have hurt your future. He was dismissing Janet's recovery process as brainwashing while maintaining his original narrative that stealing from me had been an act of parental protection. I understand that you needed to establish your independence and moving to Seattle was probably the right choice for your career, he wrote, but destroying your family through criminal prosecution was unnecessary and vindictive. Destroying the family. In Bob's perspective, I had caused the destruction by seeking legal protection from their crimes, not them, by committing those crimes in the first place. His letter concluded with a conditional offer of reconciliation. If you can acknowledge that the legal proceedings went too far and caused unnecessary damage to our family, I would be willing to work toward rebuilding our relationship. Bob wanted me to apologize for holding him accountable for crimes he had committed against me. His version of reconciliation required me to accept blame for protecting myself from his financial exploitation. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Sarah Martinez, the therapist I had been seeing intermittently since moving to Seattle. Dr. Martinez specialized in trauma recovery and family estrangement, and she had helped me navigate the emotional complexities of rebuilding my life after cutting ties with my parents. "How do you feel about your mother's letter?" she asked during our session. Grateful that she finally understands what happened, but sad that it took 7 years and complete family destruction for her to gain that insight. "And your father's letter?" Angry, but not surprised. He's exactly the same person who stole my inheritance and tried to manipulate me into funding his lifestyle. Nothing has changed except that he served time in prison for his crimes. Dr. Martinez helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my parents' very different approaches to acknowledging their past behavior. Janet's accountability felt genuine but came too late to repair the fundamental damage to our relationship. Bob's defensiveness confirmed that reconciliation with him would require me to accept continued manipulation and gaslighting. "What kind of relationship, if any, do you want with each of them going forward?" Dr. Martinez asked. I thought about the question for several weeks before reaching a decision. Janet's apparent insight deserved some recognition, even if it could not restore our mother-daughter relationship. But Bob's continued manipulation needed to be met with firm boundaries. I wrote 2 separate responses. To Janet, I acknowledged her accountability and expressed appreciation for her honesty about the damage their crimes had caused. I also explained that while I respected her recovery process, I was not ready for direct contact or relationship rebuilding. "I'm glad that you understand what happened and that you are getting help for gambling addiction," I wrote. "But the trust that existed between us was destroyed permanently by years of lies, theft, and manipulation. I cannot pretend that your current insight erases that history." I offered to maintain limited contact through letters if she wanted to continue sharing her recovery process, but I made clear that face-to-face meetings or attempts to rebuild a traditional mother-daughter relationship were not possibilities I was prepared to consider. To Bob, I was more direct. "Your letter confirms that you have learned nothing from our family's destruction and your criminal conviction. You continue to blame everyone except yourself for the consequences of your financial crimes." I explained that I would not respond to future communications from him unless they demonstrated genuine accountability for his behavior and stopped attempting to manipulate me into accepting responsibility for protecting myself from his exploitation. "The legal proceedings were necessary to protect myself and other victims from your continued financial abuse," I wrote. "I do not apologize for seeking justice, and I will not apologize for building a successful life despite your attempts to control and exploit me." Uncle Marcus visited Seattle a month later and provided updates on my parents' current situations. Janet had remained in treatment and was reportedly making genuine progress in understanding the psychology behind their financial crimes. She had found work at a nonprofit organization helping other people with gambling addictions. She seems different, Marcus reported, more honest about their financial problems and more realistic about the damage they caused. Bob, however, continued to struggle with employment and housing due to his criminal record. He blamed his difficulties on the false charges I had filed against him and maintained that he had been a victim of prosecutorial overreach. He tells people that you were manipulated by lawyers who saw an opportunity to make money from a family dispute, Marcus said. He's completely detached from reality about his own behavior. Marcus also shared information about the restitution payments my parents were required to make as part of their criminal sentencing. Janet had been making regular monthly payments from her modest salary at the nonprofit. Bob had made no payments and was facing additional legal action for non-compliance. She's trying to make things right even though the amounts are small, Marcus explained. He acts like the restitution requirements don't apply to him. Their divergent approaches to accountability reflected broader patterns in how they were handling their post-prison lives. Janet appeared to be engaging honestly with the consequences of her behavior while working to build a different kind of life. Bob remained trapped in the same patterns of denial and blame-shifting that had characterized his behavior throughout my childhood. As I reflected on both letters and my responses to them, I felt a sense of closure that I had not expected. Janet's accountability provided some healing around questions of whether they would ever understand the damage they had caused. Bob's defensiveness confirmed that I had made the right decision in severing ties completely. Most importantly, their letters clarified that my healing and success had not depended on their acknowledgement or approval. I had built a meaningful life and career while they remained focused on relitigating past decisions and avoiding responsibility for their crimes. The family I had chosen, Marcus, Uncle Marcus, Mrs. Patterson, Amanda Torres, and my colleagues at the foundation, provided the support and love that my parents had never been capable of offering. Their letters reminded me that biological relationships based on manipulation and exploitation could never compete with chosen relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. I filed both letters in my personal documents and returned my attention to the work that gave my life meaning, helping other people escape the kind of financial abuse I had survived and building systems that protected vulnerable individuals from family exploitation. The past was finally truly in the past. 5 years have passed since I received those letters from my parents, and as I sit in my office this morning, I am preparing for what has become an annual tradition, speaking to new graduates at the University of Washington School of Nursing about navigating family relationships during early career development. Today marks exactly 10 years since I walked across that graduation stage alone, clutching my diploma while my parents hosted their Super Bowl party 3 miles away. The scared, confused young woman who booked a one-way ticket to Seattle that night could never have imagined the life I have built in this city. The Family Financial Safety Foundation now operates in 28 states and has helped over 35,000 victims of family financial abuse recover stolen funds and establish independence from exploitative relatives. We've trained healthcare workers, law enforcement officers, and social service providers to recognize the signs of family financial manipulation and respond effectively to help victims. My book has been translated into 12 languages and continues to generate letters from readers around the world who have found the courage to escape financial exploitation by family members. Your story helped me realize that my sister's behavior wasn't normal sibling competition, it was identity theft, one recent letter stated. I never would have sought legal help without reading about your experience. The legislation we've advocated for has been adopted in 17 states, creating stronger legal protections for adult victims of family financial abuse and establishing specialized courts to handle these cases more effectively. Financial institutions now have better protocols for identifying suspicious account activity that suggests family financial manipulation. Marcus and I celebrated our 3rd wedding anniversary last month with a quiet dinner overlooking Elliott Bay. He continues his work with trauma survivors while supporting my advocacy efforts, and together we've created the kind of partnership my parents never modeled: mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for each other's independence and growth. We're expecting our first child in November, a daughter we've decided to name Eleanor, after Mrs. Patterson, who passed away peacefully 2 years ago. Mrs. Patterson left me a letter to be opened after her death, thanking me for showing an old woman that documenting injustice and speaking truth could still change lives for the better. Uncle Marcus remains actively involved in the Foundation's work and serves as a surrogate father figure who demonstrates what healthy family support actually looks like. He attends my speaking engagements, celebrates my professional milestones, and provides guidance without attempting to control my decisions or profit from my success. "Your grandmother would be amazed by what you've built," he told me recently. "She wanted to protect you from your parents' financial manipulation, but I don't think she imagined you would turn that experience into a mission to protect thousands of other people." Janet continues her recovery work in Ohio and sends occasional letters updating me on her progress. She has been promoted to program coordinator at the Gambling Addiction Treatment Center and reports that helping other people understand their destructive financial behaviors has been crucial to her own healing. I see myself in every client who talks about lying to family members or stealing money for gambling, she wrote in her most recent letter. Understanding how addiction warped my thinking helps me accept responsibility for what I did to you. I appreciate her honesty and continued accountability, though our relationship remains limited to occasional written communication. The mother-daughter bond that might have existed was permanently damaged by years of manipulation and betrayal, but I respect the person she has worked to become. Bob disappeared from regular contact with family members after being evicted from his apartment for non-payment of rent. Uncle Marcus occasionally hears reports that he is living in transitional housing and still blames everyone but himself for his situation, but I no longer invest emotional energy in tracking his circumstances or hoping for accountability that will never come. The most profound lesson I've learned through this experience is that family is defined by behavior, not biology. The people who truly love you will support your independence, celebrate your achievements without expecting personal benefit, and never manipulate your emotions to serve their financial interests. Real family members don't steal your inheritance money, sabotage your career opportunities, or create false narratives about your mental health to justify their exploitation. They don't view your success as their opportunity for financial gain or your independence as a threat to their authority. The family that matters consists of people who demonstrate through their actions that they want you to thrive even when you're thriving means you no longer need them in the same ways you once did. Uncle Marcus, Mrs. Patterson, Amanda Torres. Marcus and my colleagues at the Foundation have shown me what genuine family support looks like. But perhaps the most important understanding I've gained is that surviving family betrayal doesn't have to define your entire life. You can acknowledge the damage that was done while also building something beautiful from the experience. The trauma my parents caused became the foundation for work that has helped tens of thousands of people escape similar exploitation. My stolen inheritance was recovered and transformed into resources that provide legal assistance and support services for financial abuse victims across the country. Every person we help at the Foundation represents someone who will not suffer through years of family financial manipulation in silence like I did. Every healthcare worker we train becomes more effective at identifying and addressing financial abuse in their patient population. Every piece of legislation we support strengthens protections for vulnerable adults whose family members view them as financial opportunities rather than human beings deserving of respect and independence. The one-way ticket to Seattle that I booked through tears in a hospital parking lot led not just to escape but to purpose. My parents tried to use me as a source of financial support for their irresponsible lifestyle, but their crimes ultimately became the catalyst for helping thousands of other people claim their independence and protect their financial futures. Sometimes the people who hurt you most also provide you with the experiences you need to help other people heal from similar wounds. My parents' betrayal taught me about manipulation, exploitation, and the importance of setting boundaries with people who claim to love you while treating you as a resource to be consumed. But more importantly, their betrayal taught me about resilience, the power of chosen family, and the possibility of transforming personal trauma into professional purpose that benefits society. As I prepare to speak to this year's nursing graduates, I think about what I want them to understand about navigating family relationships during their early career years. Family members who truly support your success will never ask you to sacrifice your financial independence to fund their poor choices. They will never lie about your character to justify their manipulation. They will never steal opportunities from you or create crises designed to keep you financially dependent. If people in your life are exhibiting these behaviors, they are not functioning as loving family members regardless of their biological relationship to you. You have the right to protect yourself from financial exploitation, even when the perpetrators are people who raised you or claim to love you. Your achievements belong to you, not to family members who want to profit from your hard work and dedication. Your financial resources are yours to manage, not theirs to manipulate, through guilt, obligation, or fabricated emergencies. Most importantly, you deserve relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care for your well-being, not relationships where your value is measured by your willingness to subsidize other people's irresponsible behavior. The family that truly matters will celebrate your independence rather than trying to undermine it. They will support your dreams rather than sabotaging your opportunities. They will be proud of your success rather than viewing it as their personal financial opportunity. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong in family financial relationships. Document concerning behavior. Seek help from people outside the family who can provide objective perspective. And never apologize for protecting yourself from exploitation, even when the perpetrators are people you love. Breaking free from family financial abuse is not about being ungrateful or selfish. It's about refusing to enable destructive behavior and choosing to build relationships based on honesty, respect, and genuine care rather than manipulation and exploitation. The scared young woman who walked across that graduation stage alone 10 years ago had no idea that her family's betrayal would become the foundation for a career dedicated to protecting other people from similar crimes. She could never have imagined that the worst experience of her life would eventually transform into the most meaningful work she could do. But that transformation was only possible because she found the courage to walk away from people who were harming her, even though they claimed their actions were motivated by love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for manipulative family members is to stop enabling their destructive behavior by removing yourself from their schemes. I built a life beyond their betrayal, not in spite of what they did to me, but because of what their crimes taught me about the importance of protecting vulnerable people from exploitation by those who should love them most. That's the legacy I want to leave through the Foundation's work, a world where family financial abuse is recognized, reported, and prosecuted consistently, and where victims have access to resources that help them rebuild their lives and reclaim their independence. Every person who finds the courage to escape financial manipulation by family members creates the possibility that others will recognize their own strength and seek help. Your story of survival and recovery becomes a lifeline for someone else who needs to know that escape is possible and that there are people who will support their journey toward independence. The one-way ticket I booked through tears in a parking lot 10 years ago was not just about fleeing a toxic situation. It was about claiming the right to determine my own future and build relationships worthy of the person I was meant to become. Sometimes the family that betrays you leads you to discover the family you choose and the strength you never knew you possessed. True success isn't about making those who hurt you proud. It's about becoming the person you were meant to be, despite their limitations, and using that growth to help other people claim their own power. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced financial manipulation by family members? How did you recognize the behavior, and what steps did you take to protect yourself? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage to seek help. Please like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe to this channel for more content about overcoming family trauma, and share this story with anyone who might benefit from understanding that financial abuse is real serious and something they can survive and overcome. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you deserve relationships based on love and respect, not exploitation and manipulation. The family that truly matters will support your independence rather than trying to control it for their benefit. Your future is yours to create regardless of the family you were born into. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who view your success as their opportunity, rather than something to be celebrated on its own terms.